Mary Ann Golden.
I believe so.
Chris is running.
Oh, no.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Council Rock School Board Finance Committee meeting for the month of May. Today's May 12th, 2022. I'm Joseph Hidalgo, and I'll be moderating tonight. Start with a roll call to my right, please.
Matt Pedersen, IT Director.
Ed Salem, Middle School Board.
Mike Thorwald, School Board.
Dr. Pine, School Board.
Ed Tate, School Board.
Kevin Carpuck, Cornerstone Advisors Asset Management.
Bob Hickey, School Board.
Jason Harris, Director of Business Administration.
Sue Elliott, Acting Superintendent.
Andy Sanko, Director of K-12 Education.
Michael Roosevelt, School Board.
Joe Hidalgo, School Board, and I have Mary Ann McKee on the phone, School Board, and I believe Kristen Marcel's on route. Anybody else? Okay, with that, I think I'm going to let Mr. Harris take over with the agenda and presentation. Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Yes, there are also two guests in the audience tonight. Rich Dyer from Seltzer is our insurance broker, as well as Mike Fitzgerald from Workplace Central. So we have a robust agenda, a bunch of discussion items. The insurance renewal, so Rich is here to talk about that. The MBIT budget is on your agenda to be approved for next month, for June, as passed by the Joint Operating Committee. There's a formality with the plan Part K. Matt Frederickson will talk about software replacement requests, and then a bunch of items leading up to the 22-23 fund discussion update. So without further ado, we did get a Universal Service Administrative Company, which is otherwise known as Erate. We got approval for $36,762, which is used for our fiber. Matt can talk more about it, but it's approved and funded. We basically have to front the money and then reimburse us. Matt,
This is just something we've been participating in for at least the last 18 years. Our consultant is Julie Shell from Harrisburg. She actually runs the PA E-rate listserv for the state, so she's very knowledgeable on this. And we have a meeting probably January of every year, just discuss ways we can take advantage of E-rate, and this has been the most consistent for us since they removed phone service. When it was phone service, we were averaging around $86,000 a year, but they removed that and they added the dark fiber. So.
Do the numbers jive with usual?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then we have insurance renewal. So Rich is here to talk about the renewal at the very high level. The board was sent the proposal with the inclusion of coverages. They're pretty much the same as they were last year, with the exception of the upgrade to the accident policy, which would match the language of our student accident policy, as given direction of the previous finance committee. Coverage do include upgrades to an accident, machinery, boiler, cyber crime, general property liability, automobile, workers' compensation, etc. We do have some optional coverages that we can discuss tonight and see if the board's appetite to take those on or to change any type of deductibles. But it would be my recommendation to the board to approve as is, and then if there were other pieces of the policies that we want to implement, such as the terrorism policy, it would increase the aggregate number to up by $10,000. Last year, the aggregate cost was $1,067,000, $198. It's going up about $30,000, and part of that is related to the cyber crime, the exposures for Bitcoin and ransomware and things like that. So it's basically a pool risk, as well as there's a $5,000 upcharge for, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about $5,000 for the student accident. So I'll turn it over to Rich if you had any questions. I have the binder here, and it was distributed to the board as soon as I received it.
Yes, so the student accident, should I just present? Or
Sure.
Next question. The student accident was upgraded for athletic participants only. Covers like the first 25,000. Historically, it covers like the deductibles that aren't covered, or somebody might be uninsured. But it's athletic participants only. Now it's all students, all extra activities. So with water, there was a situation earlier that did not provide that type of protections. This makes sense to avoid any potential lawsuits down the road. The other area of significance is on the property values. It went up significantly. Obviously, with the supply chain issues, material costs are up dramatically. So the appraisal company, I think it was the first time in 10 years that they actually came out and physically inspected it. They do reviews every year, but it did increase dramatically, and CM Region offset the costs. They actually reduced the rate and offset the costs in other areas. So CM Region is a good program.
Are there any questions? Just real quick, the terrorism was mentioned as an option. Is that something you're seeing other school districts carry, or why is that mentioned tonight as an optional?
You're going to see multiple options. We always offer it. It has never been selected here in Council Rock School District. And typically where we see terrorism being selected is more in the inner cities,
Okay.
where you're more of a target, or you're located near a target. So typically it is not selected.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Jason.
And so we have a list of the coverages. The expiring costs are on the left-hand side, and the renewal costs are on the right-hand side. The adjusted expiring cost is, can you give like the layman's version of what that middle column represents?
Yeah, so basically we take the expiring costs and we increase the exposures. And you'll see, I can't see it very well, but on the property line, the exposures went up significantly. So you can see the adjusted expiring went up by a significant amount. And you can see the renewal premium is down. So you're comparing it to the adjusted expiring to the renewal cost. So when you look at the bottom line, the adjusted expiring, taking into consideration all of your exposures, whether it be payroll or property values, comes in at $1,161,000 versus the expiring of $1,067,000. So you can see the actual premium is about $65,000 lower. When you look up top, the property premium started at $252,000. The adjusted expiring is $349,000, but the renewal cost came down to $298,000. So they dropped the rate to offset that increase in values. And you can see the other offsets are general liability. They reduced the premium from $75,000 to $55,000. Business auto from $28,000 to $22,000. Excess liability by $1,000. So overall, the top line is CM Region's policies, 446, adjusted expiring 551, but the actual premium is 469. Student accident, you can see that went up by $5,000. That's the adjustment, purchasing the additional coverage. Most of the other lines of coverage are relatively stable. You can see the equipment breakdown went up, but that went up correspondingly to the property increase in values. Cyber liability went up just because there are just so many cyber attacks, extortion attacks out there, the ransomware. And just, you know, last year we did increase the limit on ransomware and extortion from $1 million to $2 million. And pollution liability, relatively stable. The workers' comp has remained relatively stable. I think expiring was $499, it's gone down about $12,000. So that's it overall. Is there any questions regarding the spreadsheet?
I don't see any. Just a note, Krista Marcel entered the meeting. Thank you.
Any more questions for Rich? I'll give him back the rest of his evening.
Thank you, Ricky.
Yes, thank you.
The NBIT budget, we talked about it in previous finance meetings. That meeting that we had anticipated an increase of about $16,500, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hickey, Mr. Marcel, there's an additional class, a college class that they're adding to the group. and the net cost to the district would be the net share, proportional share, which is about $99,000 total.
Right.
Right, so Council Rock's portion has been adjusted in the budget from $1,916,000 to $1,932,000. So on the agenda in June, you will have a roll call item to approve the budget for MBIT. And we have to send over the forms to Frank Iata and make sure that we have a proper roll call.
Sounds good.
Good. All right, Plan Com Part K, the district did refund the bonds, I believe it was 2016. We finally got approval from PDE for reimbursement. And currently it's at 17.78%, and that brings our aggregate revenue expected to be about $1.4 million in rental renewal. We call it rental, state subsidy calls it a rental because it technically is a lease. It's some nuanced piece in PDE code because they're approving the debt and allowing us to, they're borrowing money, so they actually have a stake in our buildings. So they're giving us 17% of the payment every year, and that's about $20,000 a year in the first year, so we get 17% of that. So every year we make a payment, they give us 17% back until the state decides to actually fully fund Plan Con like they had intended to about 15 years ago. But as you recall, they borrowed money to make good on some of those things, and Council Rock does take advantage whenever it can. So I'm asking for a ceremonial approval of this document so that I can file with PDE so I can get the district's money.
Any objections?
All right.
Okay. That's affirmative.
The board did ask for an update, and this was a recent addition simply because I didn't have any information to give you considering the borrowing for the series of 2023. As you know, the board did task Cropper with a demographic study and then tasked Doug Taylor's team to get updated costs for a base bid, a 5-classroom upgrade, and a 10-classroom upgrade for Richboro Elementary. So this is, I sent the board the really small numbers with all the debt service on it, but this is the ready for print version. If the board were to borrow money, the base case with the numbers that Doug had presented in the original meeting, I believe in March, about $26 million borrowing. With the fluctuation in the bond yield, it's the estimated debt service required went from about $1.5 million in the previous iteration to about 2.7, and that's just to cover the increased interest in the cost. If the base case plus 5 classrooms, Doug's estimate was about $31.5 million. You would need about $4.2 million additional in fund balance for debt service. Now, just so everyone understands, our current debt service budget is $18.6 million, $18.7 million. It would be 18.7 plus 4.2 if you went with 5 classrooms. And if you went with the 10 classrooms, it's 18.7 plus 5.1. The good news is that you already have $2.3 million in your debt service fund. That's an audited number. That's actually sitting in cash in a bank. Okay, so this money is not necessary for every year, because if you look at the yield, at the impact of the debt service payment, there is 1 year that you'll need about $1.9 million additional. So over the next 5 to 6 years, it will creep up and then go up significantly, and then in the following years it'll go to about $16 million in total debt service. So you'll actually have room in your budget in future years. So we get through this managing with some of our general fund balance as well as our debt service fund balance. It is conceivable that the board could opt for the 10 classroom if it so chose, but we would have to do some careful planning as far as inter-fund budget transfers within the year that debt service was due. Questions?
Is there a debt service chart that you could plot?
I
Or they have it already?
I've circulated that to the board,
Okay.
and
With these numbers?
yes. So
Okay.
basically, I took the 2.7, the 4.1, and the 5.1. There are 3 scenarios. There are 3 scenarios for borrowing. So we're borrowing 26. You'll see the debt service for that one, and then the 31 and the
Okay.
36.
I haven't got to it. Any other questions?
So when you say that the 2.37 is sitting there, you mean it's budgeted?
No, that's actually sitting in a debt service fund in cash, in the bank, in capital.
And then what's gonna be if we get the 5 or 10 classrooms?
If you get the five, if the board opted for the 5 classroom option, you would need about 1.8 million additional over those 3 or 4 years. And then if you went for the 10, you would need about 2.8 million in addition to what you already have.
In addition, so you mean it has to come from our budget?
Yes. We would either have to contemplate it as a one-time transfer within the budget, or whatever savings we could yield with the bid process. For instance, Doug's team brought back almost $3 million in savings of money we contemplated on borrowing that we can use for other projects. So that money has not been contemplated here. On the audited number as of June 30th, you have about $2.3 million in that fund. I anticipate that to go up by the end of the year because there is money that's allocated for those projects. But if we get it at a lower price, the district holds on to the benefit of having that money to allocate toward either other debt service or other projects.
And so this is for 2023, but it has to happen in the following, like 24, 25, there will be more money needed, right?
So yes and no. So what you have on your debt service, in your debt service budget right now, you have 18.7 million that's coming from the general fund. You also have 2.3 million that if you needed to increase your debt service, you could go up to almost $21 million in 1 year. But you couldn't sustain that in future years. You could do 21 million in 1 year, and then you have to come down or either raise taxes or cut expenses. So what I'm proposing is if the board so chose, I can certainly build a plan that is attainable. I haven't done any of the crunching of the numbers, but this is just the bare bones. If the board chose, this is the high end of what it would cost and the debt service needs. So when the board considers how many classrooms they need and how many classrooms they can afford, you have a realistic delta between needs, wants, and how you pay.
I mean, I thought that the 5 classrooms additional is absolutely needed. I mean, that was my impression.
If I may, we could also, since we found $9.9 million last year in the budget, not borrow the money and just do a one-time, instead of doing a bond issue and spreading it out over 20 years, just spend down the fund balance by.
And that's certainly.
And that resolves everything, and then there's no payments out.
There are some districts in the southern part of the state who save their pennies for years and all of a sudden pay for a school.
This won't pay for a school, but it would pay for these additional classrooms.
It certainly could.
Yeah, actually, I was going to bring this up further down the presentation and ask if there is a downside of doing that. Because instead of having the money sitting there, why don't we just use it to finance at least some of the construction? Is there a downside to that?
There really is no downside with the exception of you're going to reduce your fund balance. But if you're borrowing less money, your credit rating's not as impacted.
Kevin, you're shaking your head.
Yeah,
Jump in anytime you want.
yeah, absolutely, thank you. And at this point, there really isn't a downside because the cash, which we'll get into in a couple minutes, will start earning more, just like the bond payments are going to go up. But the FAR in the years 15 and 20 are going to go up more than we're going to earn on the cash. So in our parlance, it's a negative carry to, and we're not saying to spend every dollar, you don't want to do that, but, by keeping the extra money in cash and issuing bonds, and the district will end up kind of upside down on payments. So, this is a PFM thing, not a cornerstone thing, but we would be very supportive of figuring out how to make that difference work to not necessarily borrow a bunch more money.
And Kevin, that would be, still preserve $20+ million for bond credit rating, rainy day, roof blows off the school. We still have
Right, but
We seem to be sitting on an awful large pile of funding right
yeah, and you have a big budget, right?
Mhm.
So it's a lot of money in dollar terms,
now.
but yeah, in terms of will the district over the next 20 years, be better off not borrowing it, though it's very likely you all will be.
Go ahead, Mr. Tate.
Mike's right. 9+ million, that's how we got to the 32 million in the reserve fund. And we've talked a lot about how far down we should spend, so I think this is a good conversation. And just to throw in a little bit of history, this debate has gone on for a long time. Exactly where our fund balance should be. So that I really appreciate your chiming in, Kevin, because it is a subjective decision where we end up. But I think that's a really good point. In the long run, the interest on our borrowing is going to be greater than the interest we're going to earn on our reserve.
Right, correct.
Good. Very helpful.
We could do a combination of both, too. And to
Absolutely.
go totally into it, because we're talking about not reducing the fund balance when it comes to budgeting, is what I heard. So, but to your point, it makes a lot of sense.
One-time purchases are a whole lot different than budgeting salaries.
Completely.
With money in the bank.
Completely,
Absolutely.
completely.
And the more the district can absorb in cash payment to avoid an increase to a bond payment, you could even sunset the 18.7 sooner if you use the cash.
And forgive me, the chart that you sent to the board, when was that, recently or was it a while back?
A day ago.
Okay.
I'll research it.
I'm trying to
I'll
find it.
research it.
Okay. It was yesterday?
I believe so.
Okay.
I'd be happy, I'm sorry to interrupt, I'd be happy to work with Mr. Harris to kind of project that in terms of.
Sure. Yeah, we've had them in the past.
And that's kind of what your head was bobbing away, so I apologize for
sorry.
picking on you.
Yeah, no.
This is your world.
Yep.
And you guys have done a great job since I've been on the board presenting what ifs, a roadmap to where we need to be.
Mhm.
So, we discussed this a couple of board meetings and committee meetings back about expediting Ridgecrest. Since then, we've landed our group to come in and look at our enrollment, so we have some decisions to make about a whole lot of things. But the financial part of this is a big deal now because the evolving world that we're living in is not where we were 6 months, 8 months, 2 years ago. So I've always been proud of the work that you folks have done for us, and I'm confident that when we get these bids back, you're going to be surprised the value, as Doug likes to say, the value added to adding classrooms, 5 or 10. But I keep saying we need it. Should we do it? My guts always do it. But this gives us a real strong plan, and I appreciate the work you guys do. But this board's got a lot of decisions to make when it comes to this project overall. But to Mike's point, this is why that money is in there, Mr. Tate as well. Buy it down a little bit now, because there's boards after us who have to eat what we've done today.
If I
Sure.
may, the one other point I would make is that 5 million classroom addition certainly looks affordable.
I think 10 classroom looks even more affordable.
If we need it, yeah.
It's only $1 million more for 5 more classes.
Good point.
Debt service, no.
In debt service terms.
Debt service.
Right. And so I wanted to get this in front of the board in advance of any unveiling of discussions. So it gives you time to just marinate the numbers in your mind, just to know that all of these are actionable, but they're going to take more or less conservative steps as the boards feel. Whether it's fueling cash from multiple funds, one fund, borrowing it all, not borrowing it all. So you have some options.
Is this under board agenda item C, this slide? I mean, basically, this is under the plan con K presentation, or is this separate?
It's actually for the agenda, we call it
Yeah.
under part C.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
Continue, please.
All right, transportation. This is, it's a bit quiet, right? Kind of good. So we have fully executed agreements in hand. Some leases are done. Durham Student Services did meet and greet with existing employees of First Student on April 12, 2021. Offers of employment have been made, and for existing employees. And Durham, we are hosting a hiring event here at Chancellor, May 16th through 27th, 18th. So if anyone wants to do a part-time bus driver gig, you're more than welcome. Actually, the board's excluded because you can't pay yourself. But anybody listening to, if you want to be a bus monitor, we're more than welcome to have, and they will provide training. So we're really excited about that. We've gotten the imprimatur of our attorney and their attorney. They work really well together. So I'm happy to have final signatures on that, and we will be ready to go for August 12th.
Jason, what is the timeline for when they officially, unofficially start the transition?
Well, the transition has begun now.
Okay.
And so that means that the agreement with the union, recognition of the Teamsters Union and meeting with union leadership on their side, with the Durham side. So I have not been privy to those conversations for the third party, but we're, for all intents and purposes, we're ready to go for 8/1.
How has bus service been during the transition?
There's been one pickup that a letter to the board to, and the dispatchers gave us an early warning, and they ended up having everything covered.
Okay.
How's the cooperation from First Student?
I can't comment on that because I haven't been in direct contact with.
You haven't heard any
anyone.
complaints?
No news is good news.
Good.
We have not gotten any nasty grams from parents who missed buses for multiple days in a row. Those people who are committed to staying at Durham once First Student departs, they're interested in keeping their jobs. So that I would assume that those are high points.
Good. Thank you.
Anyone else?
All right.
I'm Mary McKee.
Food service. PDE finalized a request for additional information. I did send that over, and we got, as late as yesterday, a final document. Good news is there were 3 very minor findings at schools. We have to do better on lunch counts, and that's a staffing issue. And we do need to do our work on the wellness policy. That will come next week with the Food Service Advisory Committee, and then we'll work through the Board Policy Committee to get the right policy according to the Department of Food and Nutrition's requirements. I still need a board member for the Food Service Advisory Committee, so now that I have a captive audience.
Ms. McKee volunteered to do that, but she might not be able to speak.
She's on the line.
All right, we will
Next
have,
Tuesday?
it will be a Zoom meeting, and any member of the board is invited. But for posterity, we need to have a named member of the board as part of the committee when we submit the list to PDE.
That's next Tuesday
Correct.
at 12?
2.
2. So, Ms. McKee, are you on the line? Are you able to make that?
I would, let's do that offline.
Yes, I am, and I will.
Thank you. But he had a captive audience he wanted to. Okay, thank you, Ms. McKee. I'll back her up if I have to.
I'll send the Zoom invite to the entire board. If you'd like to join, you're more than welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I plan to be there, so thanks for the reminder.
Well, thank you. And for anyone who's listening on live or on the recording, if you're interested in becoming part of the Food Service Advisory Committee, we're always interested in having parents, business owners, and community members. Office supply vendor, Mike Fitzgerald's here, and I'm hoping to reintroduce Mike to the group. He works for Newtown, formerly known as Newtown Office Supply. I have a former relationship in another district, and we've had great service. And one of the key points is it's all about relationship. We do business with people, right? Entities interact, we do business with people. And Mike's here to talk about what he can offer our district. And one of the things that really appealed to me was the ability to offer a set of options for our staff in terms of office supplies and materials, and give also less expensive options, not only to save money with the budget, but to preserve our co-stars and our omnium pricing. So Mike, you want to?
Sure. Thanks for having me.
touch on Omnia. So we are part of a independent buying group of independent dealers like yourselves across the nation. Omnia Partners, you may be aware of it, it's the largest cooperative organization in the United States. We go through our national accounts arm, Epic Business Essentials, who helped competitively bid and were publicly awarded this contract for office supplies. It's in force until 2024. We have rules up until 2029. We get pricing that's updated on a quarterly basis, sometimes about 30 days, as we all are dealing with that. But we do have access to that type of pricing that we can offer to Council Rock. Best of both worlds. You have that national contract. You have us literally right around the corner. You can transact business on our website. We pick it, we pack it, we stock it here in Newtown. We deliver it on our trucks, our drivers. We'll put it where you want it. So you have a local service, that consultative relationship, along with backstop with that national pricing. Any questions?
Is there anything that you can't get at Staples, Office Depot, and Amazon can, as it relates to office supplies for a school district?
So we have a distribution network, national distribution network of wholesalers that everyone that's up there utilizes one form or another. That we can pull. We pull from a Cranberry facility, 100,000 square feet, same size as Oaks, as well as across up and down the seaboard. If you need to, you can go out west to grab something. We don't want to because we're afraid, but we have that access. So whatever you're looking for, there may be some unique items that we can't get, but they are few and far between.
Anybody else? Well, I just appreciate you coming out and presenting to us. It's nice to have a local partner, especially in the district.
Thank you. Looking forward to hopefully starting up again. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Have a good evening.
Thank you. So what were you looking for?
I'm sorry?
I said, this is a discussion item, but what would we have to do?
This is, because it's CoStar's Omni pricing, it's not subject to bid. I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware that we're trying to bring some dollars that we allocate back to the local community.
Yeah.
And the local partners.
Jason, just walk me through how you folks are going to work with our schools.
How we work with your schools?
Yeah.
So you can transact business online on our website.
So the office staff would go into your...
Correct. We would set up each of the schools through what we call approval flows. So you have your users who are placing the orders. You have the option to set up levels of approvals. So maybe it's the principal. So when you designate, you can roll up the purchasing for final approval and attach a PO. It gets released into our system. We transact, we either send it, or we have it locally, we stock, and we bring it out on our trucks. So we marry up whatever is wholesale, whatever we have in Newtown, we marry up overnight, and it goes out the next business day.
What's the average savings that you're going to think you're going to bring?
It's hard to say. It really is. I mean, pricing is crazy. I mean, we've seen bids that were pulled from Bucks County Intermediate Unit for copy paper. I mean, it's just the supply chain and what's offered. And I'd say the increases in inflation is, for whatever reason, more acute in our industry than others. So in certain categories, you mentioned food service, we're seeing breakthrough supplies up to 30%. We're expecting more June 1st. We really can't see past 30 days.
So it's safe to say that you'll get better pricing than if our staff went online and shop the same products in Rossville.
It's possible. I mean,
But it's also not possible.
It's also not possible. But what we can try to do with pricing and try to understand usage from Council Rock, we've gotten some information and put together maybe custom lists where we try to, as best we can, contain costs on your top items. That's
Is there a cost of the district for this?
So
So they opt in, opt out at their leisure. Okay.
Yep, we're as good as our last one.
Great. Thank you.
So I'll give Mike back the rest of the evening.
Yeah.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we go to Cornerstone, Matt, did you just
Thank you.
want a quick update about your request for the software?
Software?
Did I miss that? It was on the agenda, and so,
The other thing I have coming up is the consortium agreement.
okay.
Is that what you're referring to?
We talked about it in cabinet. We can punt to the second.
You do have the consortium agreement on the agenda, so I'm guessing that must
Forgive
be
me,
what you're talking about.
I read it as software, but it's consortium.
Technology Pool Council Legal Services?
Yeah, it's one we do through the IU every year. It's very similar to the one that Dr. Lambert had on the agenda for the May board meeting. It's with the same firm, so.
It's on the same firm that was on the
one. Yes.
Okay.
For the record, I will be a no on that one, too.
So based on the board's vote in May, I just assumed not even bother bringing it before you guys.
So we'll move that to a roll call.
No,
Take
just
it off
take it
the
off the
agenda.
agenda altogether. And I'll let the IU know we're not going to participate this year. That's fine.
What services do they do actually do for districts?
So what it is basically,
Sorry,
it gives us, yep, that's okay, it gives us access to an attorney.
How often do we use that for law firm?
I probably send them an email once a year. I usually have a question for Mark once a year that I send them. But if any IT director sends him an email with a question, he sends a response back to everybody.
Only if you probably are part of
Only
it.
if you're part of it. They also have a website you can log in and download sample policies, other documents they put together. So it's nice to belong to, but it's not a I have to belong to.
What's the cost of that to the district?
It's $400 a year.
Kevin, you're up.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, and you can hop to the next page. This ties to both the debt offering we were talking about, but also the cash management. When you look at the Treasury yield curve here, and the two blue lines, which are lower, show where we were at the end of 2020 and where we were at the end of 2021. But that purple line where you see the really dramatic jump in rates over different time periods are where we were as of the end of the quarter. As you know, as you just heard, inflation is truly a problem and one that the Federal Reserve was probably significantly behind coming into this year. As you've been reading in the newspapers, and you know, the pain is stretching into the stock market as well, but the Federal Reserve's looking to raise rates at the short end, so that really low part at the far left, you know, has already moved up since the end of the quarter, and we expect it to move up, you know, by another 1% or 2 over the next several months. That's good news for the cash management side. So this year will end up being roughly a push in terms of earnings. Next year, you know, we expect to be well above what the current kind of penciled in budgeted amount is, but given the fluidity of the situation, we haven't, you know, bumped that number yet. But all of our cash management options, and we have several different partners, have been increasing their yields, as you would expect when the Federal Reserve's raising those. So things are working out well, and the expectation is that we're going, as the Fed raises rates, you know, we're going to make more income off of that, but we're not ready yet. As some of the folks who have been around for a couple of years, we would go out and lock in longer rates to try to earn higher income. Well, right now, you know, as the Fed's raising rates, we're saying, why not just let that come through? And it could be a different conversation come August, right, when all the tax money comes in, depending on how the Fed raises. But in general, or not in general, the program's working as expected. I do want to jump you back, if I'm not sure what page it is here, but if you go, what's up? If you keep going to the Wilmington, it says Wilmington Trust at the top. Yeah, one more. The one thing, and this is really hard to read, but the one thing, one of the reasons we're going to see a push on income, and this is something we've discussed with the board before, is we do own bonds, and we have mostly cash, but we do own some bonds that as interest rates go up, there's a little bit of mark to market. So the way the accounting happens is that goes against income. For this fiscal year, it's going to kind of wash out the income, but what, you know, if you have extremely wonderful eyes, what you'll see here is even though some of the bonds are The bonds are all bought below their face value, so they can mark to market, but we're not losing any money. They're gonna earn income and just mature as scheduled over the next year or two. So you will see some variability there that, quite frankly, when the Fed realized how far behind they were, it kind of pushed the market out quicker than even they reacted. So I did want to point that out, but it's part of the design of the program. It's a feature, not a flaw. And now all of those bonds will be kicking off a couple percent and working back up to their par value over the next couple of years. So from our perspective, at the short end, we're going to make some money, obviously from the borrowing side when you're out, and you stagger it, but, you're out 10, 15, 20 years, those rates are going to be moving up as well.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Mike.
You said the Fed was only going to come up a percent or two. What would happen if it went up, I don't know, 5%? Because with inflation ringing in at over 8%, they're behind and they're way behind.
Yep.
And at a 5% short-term interest rate environment, are we okay? I mean, in terms of what we've got.
So, yeah, in this portfolio, it would be
We'd
positive.
take a hit.
Yeah, well, it would be a minor one because most
yeah.
of the cash will be really responsive to that. But realistically, if the Fed has to get to 5% between now and sometime in the next year or two, you're going to have big economic the economy can't support it. So,
Understood.
right,
Yeah,
right.
understood.
So, but the actual cash investments will respond favorably, but it won't be a excellent economic time in general.
Yeah,
So.
I'm old enough to know what a 10% mortgage rate is.
Yeah,
So that's just.
yeah, I have many clients who say, people are complaining about 5% mortgages. My first one was at 18%.
There's a whole lot of people, and even in this room, that have never been in a rising interest rate environment. And that's why I'm asking.
Absolutely, and I think you're off topic a little bit, but I think you're seeing part of that in the stock market as well, where easy money, all of a sudden people are like, wait, interest rates can go up, and things are getting a little rocky.
Okay, I just want to make sure with our finances.
Yeah.
These are disagree on how far they're going to go, but I want to.
And these are really, the longest bond we have here matures in June of 2024, and that's, $1 million.
Yeah, short-term interest rates will quickly move with the higher end. It's better than the long term. The long terms are the one to get killed.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's good.
And is that because the rate is pretty much set already? That's why we don't have an impact from the inflation?
Well, right, so our earnings will go up. They'll go up as you hear the Federal Reserve raises rates. So there will be an impact of, if inflation stays at 8%, we're only earning, say, 3 or 4 or even 5, the purchasing power goes down, but we won't lose money. You won't see losses in your cash, right? You just won't earn as much which is also part of the reason we're talking about taking some of that.
Spending it now.
Yeah, the time value of money is really important when you're contemplating these kinds of projects and your cash flow.
So that money is not part of our fund balance, is it? That 11 million is part of the fund balance, out of the 11. Okay. And you would actually sell that and buy a higher interest rate?
The way bond math works is we'll get,
Take a little loss, but you get a higher interest rate.
Yeah, well, I mean, right, it'll be a push, so if we sold it and took a loss, we would just be buying something with so it's kind of 6 of 1,
We're really short term.
But you're keeping it within 2 year bonds.
Yeah, and that's right, and that, that we're talking about 11 million at the max, we're talking a lot more, where that won't be, we're not going to be deploying to 2 or 3 year paper or 2 year paper.
What we're playing with is 2 year paper. That's as aggressive as we're getting.
Yeah.
And by law, you're only limited to certain exceptions in that regard.
So And to remind the board, and it's something Mr. Harris and I discussed, refreshing the policy, the district's policy is more restrictive than Act 10, and rightfully so. Like the earning an extra 0.1 or 0.2% by taking risk.
It's extremely conservative.
Yeah, and there's no, we don't see any real value over the extra risk you would take. So, I mean, this is all federal, well, we'll say that the federal government's guaranteeing it.
Could I ask
so-
a question?
I have, just to clarify from my previous question, so when you say holdings, so this is money that instead of sitting there as cash, has been invested into different instruments, right? It's more than that, than sitting there as cash maybe, or different funds?
Yes, so in the asset allocation slide, and I don't know if I got this in time to get to the board, so I'll make sure I circulate this exact one to you. But every month, the board gets a board report of where your money is. And so Wilmington Bank and Trust, Stone Castle, TD General Fund, Pliget General Fund, TD Bank is our local depository, Pliget is our Pennsylvania local government investment trust, where we receive our state subsidies. And we also have a compensated balance account at TD Bank, Cap Reserve, and those are our the escrows that we talked about. So you've got a couple million in the escrows, and then your bond funds. So when you borrow money, the money is transferred into a holding account for the construction fund. So they're called the bond series of whatever year it is. And so you can see that the aggregated capital projects is there. And then you have the cafeteria, scholarship, and student activities. So the aggregate portfolio, ending market value, beginning market value, now keep in mind, we're spending money, we're paying folks, and we're not collecting as much revenue as we would normally in July, August, September. So we are spending, we're paying our vendors, we're paying them on time. So we went from a $195 million spend whole to a $167 million, and that's normal. So the district allocates $250 million a year to pay its obligations. So you're going to see some fluctuation in there. So please don't get nervous when you see it drop that significantly, because payroll is $4 million of payroll. So it's just quarterly. So keep in mind, a good chunk of that is your payroll.
I just wanted to make a comment in the middle where my eyes focused. I could tell that it was listing the escrow accounts.
Yes.
And I know that in the past, we were having a conversation about how much is in our escrow accounts from projects going very far back to
Yes.
ones that are more recent. And so I just because it was up, I just wanted to mention it because that was, I think, maybe Bob, when we were in meeting with Ed, we were talking about the escrow accounts. I can't remember what it was, but I just think it's helpful to see it because it's actually like laid out there.
So I can do a one slide, one pager of all the escrow accounts. I mean, it's there, it's in every board report.
Yeah.
Because we do earn interest on those accounts. And I have met with bond counsel, and I've begun the discussions with Doug and the municipal managers so that we can get some of those monies released. And one of the stipulations is that if there are any outstanding pieces of the projects, for instance, one of them requires a flower bed, hasn't been installed, has somebody verified it was installed, does the municipality have it? They sign off, we sign off, we transfer the money to the holding account, and then we can pay capital projects with it. I've been advised by bond counsel that we need to use the oldest money first and then pay forward. So if there are small dollar projects like the lighting or the additional concrete work or whatever we need to do, instead of borrowing money for it, we would use this money first.
There is a legal limit on how long you can sit on that cash flow.
Correct.
Well, that was going to be my question. I mean, we're sitting on escrows from Holland Elementary from 2012 to the $1.2 million. And I would venture to say by the time we get it back, we're going to have conversations about a roof or something. Really, I mean, maybe not a roof,
No,
but
you're absolutely right.
I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous that we're sitting and waiting for this money to come back to us at this juncture. It really is.
Would you like us to go to a supervisor meeting?
I was going to,
That
that's
is
what I
not
was going to ask.
necessary. That is not necessary. As soon as I have the requisite information that we would need to complete. I believe there was a rainwater study that was done and vetted by our attorney. There are small nagging projects that we need to make sure that we're checked off, and then I just need to knock on the door of the municipality.
I mean, I'd like to circle back on this when you think the time is right, because,
I hope to have an update for you before the
I
end.
mean, Bob, you talked about shaking the couch and watching the pennies fall out. There's $2 million sitting there.
But that's, I said, I mean, I go to these committee meetings and know the supervisor, you know what I mean? I don't want to say twist some arms, but talk to some people and say, hey, what can you do? I mean, you know.
What do we need to do to get it right and get our money back?
Right.
This is something you're coordinating with Doug.
Correct.
And I feel like we've talked about this, I mean, because we even talked about trying to see if we could use some of the escrow money that was here for the turf field, like
Yeah.
when COVID happened. So
To apply it.
clearly, like, yes,
Yeah.
it's been at least 2 years that we've
Yeah.
talked about some of these escrows. And obviously, you know, Jason, you're newer, but if we can help you in some way, I think that's what we're just trying to say.
If I get stuck with a particular area, I'll be happy to reach out to the emergency representative.
Bless you.
Thank you, and thank you for looking at this, because I think, obviously, the more recent ones make sense, but some of the ones going back 10 years, like, it just seems like there's something
Yes.
kind of weird.
And there's the very painful arbitrage rebate discussion that you can't earn it, and you can't earn more money in interest than when you borrow in the bond rate. So we're going to be very careful that the longer that money sits, it has a tendency to earn, depending on whether the rates rise. So the sooner we get that money out and into other projects, I could foresee, you know, using this for the summer, some of the summer work, some of the lighting projects. That, like,
I see classrooms, I see,
I
I see a lot of things.
So Ed, to be transparent,
Right.
it could conceivably lessen the amount we could borrow, but I would see spending our immediate, like our summer work to pay, use that money as it's released to pay down those dollars.
Whatever, it's our money, we need it back.
First in, first out, that's
Yeah, well, that's great.
All right, questions for Kevin?
Yeah, I'm looking, Stone Castle, you're not managing, or is it
No, they're,
Wilmington Trust? Are you doing both? I'm just wondering.
yeah, so we oversee all of these. Wilmington Trust is the manager who owns the individual bonds. Stone Castle is they break up the assets into FDIC limit chunks among many different banks.
So if I look at, let's just say the first quarter, that's showing up there, it's almost $25,000 would be the income for the portfolio that you manage. So that's with low interest rates.
Yes.
So as interest rates go up, we're going to see that significantly bounce back up.
Right, and we're also we're not quite at the low point of the year, but we're closing in on the low point of the cash. So yeah, if I'm being recorded, so I'll lowball it a little bit and say, you know, we should be looking at $1 million to $1.25 million, 1.25 million in total earnings next fiscal year.
That's a good range, thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Kevin, offline, I'd like to discuss that with you, so I can make sure that the revenue projection is proper in the budget.
Right.
Because right now it's less than that.
I saw that and I like the low number. I look good when I come in and, no, but well, yeah.
I want to make sure, because I made a commitment to the board that any additional revenue would then come up with a contemplated tax levy.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, we kind of bounced around. Do you want to continue on your presentation? Are you pretty feeling good about it?
Yeah, unless anybody had any questions.
No, well, no, I don't. Anybody else? How about on the line? No? Okay.
No.
Thank you, Jason.
All right.
Kevin, sorry.
All right.
Jason.
And then, so you have a slight update. We did get an extraordinary special education award letter for $150,000. That is an annual application for students who have costs in excess of $100,000 a year for their education, whether it be in a Country Rock school or in a different placement. And Chuck's office takes care of that application, and we are happy to book the money.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We do not consider this part of the revenue structure simply because it is it's a dice game whether or not the money's available from the state. So we don't want to anticipate it. So if it comes, it's a nice little bonus. And if it doesn't come, then we're not upset. And it depends on the number of requests that the state gets. And sometimes they fund them all, and sometimes they fund at 25%. So I would be remiss if I'd be derelict in my duty if I put it on the line expecting it and it didn't come. The median assessed value, this is the first time in my, I've been a school administrator for quite a few years. I've never seen assessed values change, median assessed values change. And the median assessed value for all the properties is now $39,200. So the tax bills will change in two ways. If the board, so the one way it could change is the millage, and the other way it could change is the assessed value. That impacts the total number of dollars that a taxpayer would pay. So even if the board did not raise taxes, if that assessed value goes up, then their tax bill goes up. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that the state is finally coming through with funding its fair share of the state gaming money. Currently, last year it was funded at 80%. We're $5.6 million, which goes to homestead rebate in the form of millage. It's about $250, $300 per parcel if you qualify for the homestead rebate. It's going up to $6.7 million, it's a difference of $1.1 million. Now, that does impact our revenue line in the local as far as real estate tax, because when we contemplate the real estate tax and put it through the formula, it pulls that money out, and then we put it in the state share. So the revenue picture, apples to apples, stays the same, but where it's accounted for is different. So if that $1.1 million didn't come through, and the board decides to raise the tax levy no matter what, then that $5.6 million would come off the top of the aggregate. Now, whatever it decides is in tax levy, $6.7 million goes back to homeowners who are eligible for the homestead rebate.
Go ahead.
Mr. Harrison, how does the increase in the median assessed value affect our revenue, and do we have to take any action?
It does not. It simply gives you a rule of thumb by which the apples to apples, so we look at the average impact to the taxpayer. So I've recirculated the pivot chart,
Right.
updated, it's a couple dollars north of where it was. And so if you have because our assessed values are going up, so that gives me hope that our total assessments may eclipse my expectation, but that I won't find that out until later this month. And I'm hopeful to have a good report for you. But this does give me hope that those assessed values in aggregate will go up.
Anybody else?
Jason, just explain one more time for the community at large, the homestead rebate. So people that have filled out the application are qualified for the homestead rebate. In 2022, it was 5.6. Now it's 6.7. Is that an increase of applications?
No, that's not an increase of applications. That's actually an increase of the state share to fund that portion under Act 1. So the original agreement was to use the state gaming money plus the refund of the Sterling Act in other communities that come back to the district in the form of tax rebate. So the money would go to the state, flow through the state back to us using that formula.
So does it benefit the homeowners and the school district? That's what I'm trying to,
It does. It does.
not just in the
Simply because
assessed value going up.
it takes the burden off of the taxpayer. So your levy, and I have to calculate it because we depends on the number of homesteads that are eligible, and that impacts them in whatever the board contemplates in terms of millage. So it's a very tricky calculation. Once you have the number of homesteads and the estimated millage increase, or not, then I can contemplate how much in property tax relief to those who are eligible. And right now, my estimate is about $312, which is up about $40.
Okay.
Jason, So do you know who qualifies to apply for these rebates?
I don't have the statute in front of me, but on Bucks County Government's website, if you go under Board of Assessments, you can actually Google homestead rebate application. I actually had one of our neighbors who's lived in the neighborhood for a couple of years. We reviewed their property, they looked up the parcel number, and they had not applied. So we filled it out right there. So we gave them a parcel number. It was very, very simple. It goes back to the county, and they make a determination whether you're eligible. We get notice. You get notice as the property owner whether or not you're eligible. And then when you get your tax bill, you should see the H homestead rebate and then your deduct.
Do you know if it has anything to do with income?
It has nothing to do with income. It's property. It's your property. So it's your primary residence.
Who would qualify? I guess I have to look.
It's relatively easy to qualify for.
Don't they send out letters to anybody who's qualified?
We send out homestead, well, actually, the Bucks County IU, we contract with them, they send it out in December.
Okay.
So the overall pie is $6.7 million.
Correct.
So if we had, and that's for whatever we have as applications.
About 19,000 properties.
So that's 6.7 would remain 6.7 if we had 30,000.
Correct.
So the only difference would be the share to the applicant.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's based on the assessed value, so the millage determination. So there's a calculation between how much off you would get based on your millage.
Anyone else? Continue.
So that's all really good news. So
We have that confirmed, I'm sorry. We have a confirmed letter saying.
We got, yes, that is the certification letter correct from PDE. And I couldn't fill out PDE 2028 until PDE actually voted it down. So I was pleasantly surprised when I saw the increase. I actually made calls to other business managers to make sure, who my eyes could see me, but it was absolutely true.
So just to recap, this is 3 sources where we have slight increases to our expected revenue.
Correct.
Between median household assessed value, the homestead rebate, and the bond performance.
Potentially, yes.
Right.
Not just taxes.
Right.
Okay, so that brings us to the general fund budget update. This is the slide revised with subtracting the $240,000 that stayed in the budget, so that's $68,000 deficit at a 2.4. Based on the feedback that I received from the board, here's the revision. It's 2.0, top right-hand corner. And if the board recalls, it's about $150,000 per 0.1 of the Act 1 index. And we found some additional revenue in our real estate transfers. So we're actually beating the doors off of our estimate this year, so I felt comfortable to increase it. So increasing about $300,000. So currently, as we sit, all programs that we've discussed, everything that the board has asked for, the staffing requests that have been enumerated in other slides, everything stays the same except for 2 significant issues. The real estate tax drops by 0.4%, and the revenues for real estate transfer tax are upgraded by $300,000. So the delta now is $359,000.
At 2%.
At 2%. Now, if I get with Kevin prior to our June finance meeting, and he is confident that we could increase our revenue earnings on our holdings, if he's comfortable, you're comfortable, we may eclipse that.
Jason, would you please point, because I couldn't find numbers.
Sure.
So the real estate is in the 6,000s. Now, you notice, you can go back to the slide. You know, it was 200,302,000. So we pulled the $1 million out of that because of this guy, because of the 1.1 million. So we moved it from the 6,000 to the 7,000. So you'll notice that it goes from 256, 200 million and 56 million state and local to 198.57. So there's the change. And then the delta in the EIT, forgive me, it's not the EIT. Yeah, it is the EIT in the previous iteration, but it's also the real estate transfer tax. So there's about $300,000 more. Does that answer the question?
The real estate transfer tax is $300,000.
More. We're advanced. We had $2.9 million on the line, and we're on our
Last year, right?
Yeah, that was the estimate for last year.
Yeah.
And this year, we received 3.4 million. So I split the difference and put it at 3.1. 3.2, sorry, 3.2.
You're on the revenue side.
On the revenue side.
The delta there is $6.5 million.
Correct.
That couldn't have come from real estate tax.
No, that comes from real estate tax, the increase in EIT, and then the
How
increase.
much of an increase in EIT did you pull?
We estimate 17.3 million on the line last year. We're at 20.2, about $3 million.
So that's enormous.
Yes, and that's part of the 10 million from last year.
Okay, but it's a big number.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
How did you arrive at that? How did you arrive at that much of an increase?
So when I go to the tax collector committees, Keystone Collections is there, and they give annual updates. And as I reported, I guess in January, we meet quarterly, they gave us an estimate of about $21 million for next year. So I put 20.2, 20 and a quarter, just to be safe. Because the board had asked to be less conservative in the revenue projections, and so I said, in good conscience, I didn't want to go as high in the first iteration of the budget, but as those numbers are coming in, we received $600,000 today from the EIT.
Well, we're going to do the expenses too, as well as check this.
Yes.
Anybody else have a question? Go ahead.
Just for the future, the real estate transfer, the EIT, we could expect to hold steady, if not increase, in coming years. But the real estate transfer fee, that could fluctuate, right?
It can, but it's steadily increased even prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, that was one of our big surprises last year, wasn't it?
Yes.
The transfer tax.
That's a function of prices and amounts of houses being sold?
Yes, so there's a 1%. We get a 0.5%, the county gets 8%.
Right, we split it. My question was with the Keystone, when they gave you the update, was that something that they put it in an email or anything like that? Was it just completely verbal when they said 21 million? Everything's documented?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Well, this is great.
If I could just follow on to Ed's statement, and Mr. Tate, EIT will hold steady, assuming everyone keeps their jobs.
Hmm.
In a recession, that's not guaranteed. So that's the flip side of that. Houses don't seem to leave here. If they change hands, we get a piece of the pie. But if people want a job or take a lower paying job because it's based on income, that can be done.
Well,
Reduce that projection.
But I think in light of some of our earlier discussions, assuming it's going to continue to go up, maybe, something to really think about.
Well, and it might be interesting to look at, I don't know if we can go back to the Great Recession timeframe, but right before the Great Recession, like gas prices went up very high, similar to the situation that we're in now. Hopefully we don't have that happen again, but I don't know if we can look at EIT like around that time.
The Keystone, that law was passed, and I don't know when that law was passed.
So we can't.
So it was voluntary up until, one of the reasons our collections went up for a while is you couldn't hide from it, and it was, the law was
That's right,
passed,
yeah,
you
yeah,
reported
yeah,
it, take
yeah.
out your paycheck.
That's right.
And that's leveled it off since then,
Yeah.
or whatever you want to, we can say it's increasing, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, never mind.
So Jason, is your EIT number, so the conversation that we had, whether it was a committee meeting or a board meeting was, we've seemed to be very conservative, and you lean, looking at the body work system does, they're a little different than where we've been, so I think what I said was, is it time to go lean a little harder towards Keystone and get away from the conservativeness of where the district is? It's also a couple of weeks ago. A lot of things have happened in this country in a couple of weeks. Do we consider pulling that back a little bit? Do we consider meeting it somewhere where we were, but not as far back? I mean, when you look at our revenues, that is a big pivot in the revenues. $3 million increase.
No pun intended.
Yeah, a 16% increase. When you even remove $1 million from that, this budget takes a whole different optic. You remove $1.5 million, that's a bigger optic. We're banking that number comes through, and if it doesn't, you're hitting fund balance to make up your budget.
Right.
I'm just throwing it out there for the team.
No, and I think that's a good point. Do we know, in terms of this year, kind of where we are, if there's going to be any kind of like extra money, or if I know we're planning to, we have things.
We've already met our EIT budget for the year, and we're in the third quarter.
For what?
We're in the third quarter. I can get you an exact number, but I was trying to get it here on the fly, and my Wi-Fi is not cooperating. And the journal entries haven't been posted in Munis, so I want to make sure that we're clean for the end of the month, so I can give you an accurate
But
representation.
do we track that per person that we're aware of? So we're in third quarter, we're up, but are we at 80% collection rate, or are we?
We're past our expected rate. So we're up about 17.3 million.
No, I understand that, but is that how much is left out there to collect?
My understanding is about $2 million more.
Okay.
And that's what I was told in January, and that's what I reported to the board in January. And I said, I'll believe when I see it.
Right.
But we are now at the end of the third quarter for tax collection purposes, and I already saw at least a $600,000 deposit yesterday.
Yeah, because it's still coming out of my paycheck every
Correct.
payday.
Correct.
So you're gonna see that.
So this begins to, I think, open the question, at least in my mind. I understand that the budget, what we're currently doing is pretty much set. But if this performance continues, I mean, last year we had a nice surprise. It looks like this current year we're getting a nice surprise. If that trend holds true, do we want to begin to pay down our debt service?
You could always contemplate that, but I would want to work with Kevin to make sure we get the best bang for our buck.
Right.
Because there are holdings, you could take advantage of certain interest rates, different terms. There are different lenders that may have some bank qualified financing that would beat a rate in the bond market. So we want to make sure that it's competitive. But again, that's why we hired Kevin to get the best foot forward.
And to the same point, since we do have a higher fund balance than we anticipated, does it make sense to allocate more of that toward something that could actually return us money, as a little bit has happened?
Could you be more specific in what you're thinking about?
Well, he showed us a slide of where we've got $11 million in various different things that are going to get us some money. Does it make sense to put maybe, I don't know, 12, 15 $1 million into something like that and maybe generate a larger return in future years?
We can put that into the projection, certainly. I want to make sure that we're liquid enough,
right,
that, to fund our compensated absences and things like that for statutory requirements.
Absolutely.
But certainly there are options.
Yeah. Okay.
Jason, Mike, I would just submit that we do have a litany of summer projects and Doug's list that we're actually storing money to grab from. That list is, Mr. Tate always says you can't keep pushing off repairs.
Absolutely.
You know, my sense or my opinion would be to at least look at what we have outstanding and go grab it quicker. Because as we quickly learned at Council Rock South, that lighting project
Yeah.
is $1 million out of nowhere.
And,
So,
and projects, I think, from my brief time on facilities have demonstrated there's a lot that just pop up that you
Sure.
don't necessarily consider.
so, yeah, I'd like to maybe snake away a little money into that, into our fund for that. And the $1 million at Council Rock South for that lighting project is out of nowhere.
Right.
You know, that wasn't scheduled to 2026. So as much as I think, I mean, we all can talk about this. For me personally, I like the idea of having the money we started last year, putting money away for our projects and what ifs,
Well,
what pops up.
To that point, we do have money in the capital fund. I mean, Doug has shown in the past couple of meetings where we've got roughly $2 million
So we just started that.
right. And so,
I'm just, my opinion, I think that's a great place to put some money.
Okay, Ms. Collins.
So going back to being conservative on the revenue side,
Yeah.
we know the stock market is taking a big hit, and if that continues, it definitely will affect negatively the revenue and income. So that's other than people moving or not having jobs, also not gaining, earning from the stock market. And right now, pretty much everybody participates in the stock market, so that would be a reason to have less revenue than expected. I mean, I hope not, but
well, that's okay.
based on what Mike and Ed said, I would feel more comfortable being a bit more conservative on the revenue.
Well, I just want to try to go back to when Jason had put it out there and we talked about it, and you made, Mr. Solomon made that comment about, can we get a little bit more aggressive with the projections of revenue? So he came back and he increased the revenues a whole bunch. So now we're going to try and maybe split the difference, go back to say, the slowing real estate market, that could be, if the real estate market slows down, these numbers are going to be affected. And that's why I don't want to be touching a fund balance, because I do anticipate straining revenue, or at least want to have that cushion above that 10% fund balance for what is possibly going to be an economic slowdown, bigger than we've seen in a very long
I
time.
know what you mean, and I remember that discussion. I just feel that in the last, week or couple of days, things have changed so much, and the volatility is so much bigger that what we said before, now we have different.
Well, this is why Jason came to us originally with those conservative.
Nothing wrong.
No, I'm saying that's why a financial manager comes in with a conservative value to start with and say, this is what we need to prepare ourselves for. So he came in higher. Now, if we're going to go back on the projected revenues that we asked him to increase, now that's going to change everything, and we have a lot of work to do.
That will ultimately increase your operating, it'll make your net operating result low.
Right.
So we need basically to increase taxes more, or eat into the fund balance, or make some serious cuts
Yeah, there you go.
to operations somehow.
Right. I mean, we're not asking Jason to hit a bullseye with an arrow. We're trying to hit it with a basketball. I mean, that's kind of the idea. But what we're tasked with doing right now is, with that approach, is to figure out how much we need to raise taxes and what we can comfortably assess as a budget. We're not trying to be prognosticators and hit the nail right on the head with exactly what it is. We're trying to take a little bit of a room.
Agreed. And I wanted to follow up on the point that Mr. Sullivan made. I think we've made a much bigger investment in the summer projects, the CIP, because we had such a good year last year financially. And I think that's marvelous. I think that's terrific. So let me ask the hypothetically, Mr. Harris, if we had a recession begin in July, and it seriously impacted our EIT and, well, first of all, the EIT and the real estate transfer tax I mean, this is gravy. Those represent about, together, how much of our total revenue picture? Because I think it's not a huge portion of our total revenue.
So earned income tax is 20 million, and then your 20 million, and your transfer tax is 3.2 million. So
Yeah,
20,
very small.
about 24, $23.5 million.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's 10%. That's substantial, but it's not like our financial fortunes rise and fall with the EIT and the real estate transfer tax. The positive upside is a real bonus, but it's not like we're really, on the cutting edge because of those two revenue sources. But what I was driving at was, say we have a recession, begins in July, and our revenue streams really are affected. How do you, as the business administrator, compensate for an unexpected decrease in revenue?
Well, first, we look at our expenses. So what's going up? So it would be an immediate reduction or curtailment of non-essential programs. And services, meaning we're not buying as much paper, we're not buying some of the services that we can live without. And then we go to cabinet. We have a reasonable discussion of what things should we curtail. And that's not a one-person job, right? That's the cabinet, the board, and what the tolerance of the community is. But what this board and district have that a lot of districts don't have is fund balance that could withstand some fluctuations in that portion and still maintain its credit rating. And I think that's what I'm not a crystal ball kind of fellow, but seeing what I've seen about the history of, we've presented that as far as, the revenues have consistently come in strong for EIT and transfer tax. And this year might not be the year to metaphorically worry about it. A year from now, perhaps.
Yeah.
But now we have time to plan.
Right.
And if we get some of those escrows and we, get better pricing on some of those good projects, and we cap our borrowing, let's say if we went from a $26 million borrow to a $20 million borrow because we're funding $6 million cash, that's a significant chunk of fund balance that in future years, you drop to 15 million.
Yeah, well, that was, you answered it the way I had hoped, which is calling to mind the fact that we have a good cash reserve. And the other is that if we see a recession in the coming months, it'll have a bigger impact on the following year's budget than the budget that we're now discussing.
That is correct.
So, I mean, I think it's prudent to be concerned about the possible recessionary impact on those two revenue streams, because it won't impact property taxes, which is 90% of our revenue, at least immediately, directly. But, we're okay. Should we, God forbid, have a recession, starting mid-year, we're okay.
I could say, based on my understanding of our current financial picture, we can reasonably weather a storm.
Like 1 year, but remember,
Yeah.
also with the
Then
real
this,
estate.
like I just said, the next year.
It could be, because, delinquencies would go up, collection rates would go down when the real estate taxes, definitely. It's part of the monster out there. So I think we're going to have to you're going to try to ask the board what you would need tonight, because I'm thinking that I don't want to wait till the next board meeting to have another discussion. So I'm already putting it out there that we can get something going, not the 19th, but something soon in between, on a Tuesday preferably, to have further discussion to really hammer this out. We got more time tonight, but I'm just thinking, we just changed the revenue projections and now we're going to go back to where we were, or somewhere in between, from what we were at on April 25th or whatever, April 11th, when we had that board meeting and we talked about it. So I want to continue. Yes, Mike, I'm confused.
I can't give you an answer on the revenue tag, so I see the expense side. We haven't finished even the whole review here.
But we do understand that the revenue was, it's already asked that the revenue might be a concern that we're too aggressive. Seeing the 3 million. So let's continue then.
I mean, you don't have to move on from me, but I mean, it appears at first blush like we closed the entire budget gap by assuming more revenue, and we did nothing to expenses. I want to see what you did to expenses.
Yeah.
So between the last meeting and this, there have been no changes with the exception of that $250,000, 240 reduction. And I put out to the board for feedback about tolerance for cuts, and I haven't received any, so I went with the numbers I had. And so based on that, I absent any direct.
Well, I'll give you some direct if you want. I'm going through the line item budget, and everything that says salary and temporary went up a factor of 50 or more. Cut that. So I don't know why all our temporary employees are getting monstrous increases in this budget. So cut that. There's a good start. I don't know why. I mean, 5,000% for one. It went up. So.
Well, so to be clear, some of those are staff that are on current leaves. They're in our budget projection because they're in there and they're living in that line item. So we're either paying for a staff member who's already currently on leave or a staff member who's currently serving in that position.
Okay, I'm looking at the 1,100 section of the budget, and I see educational salaries temporary. In the 22 budget, it was $86,000. In next year, you've got $4.5 million.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, and so these are based on where people live currently in the budget.
Right.
Right, and I don't know if there was any pre-work done by the previous administration to move those salaries to make them right. But absent any other schema, this is what it's costing.
I can't wrap my head around $4.5 million in temporary employees, and that's only in the 1,100s. We can go further down and find more.
That's a good question. So are we talking about increased head count, or are we talking about increased pay rates?
No, we're talking an amount of both, because you have contractual obligations that you must meet, but you also have staff members who are collecting on sick leave, and then you're also paying a staff member who's doing the work. So if that person is in the budget now, and we anticipate them to continue in that leave, that salary, we still have to budget for that person's salary when they return.
So these are individuals who are covering absences.
Correct.
How many individuals does that represent?
You had a board list that was 40 at your end of assignment. I think it was 40 or so.
Well, then these numbers, I'm still struggling because I'm seeing at least $11 million in temporary. So
Where is that?
it's in the spreadsheet Jason sent us today.
Where is it?
Roll up by major functions. Let's take it apart. It's all shrunk. So,
Does it make sense to try to have Christine Taylor maybe?
I don't need an answer tonight.
Well, no, not tonight, but I'm just saying like we have, when are we voting on the budget again?
June 16th.
So about a month. So maybe tonight we can figure out like what are the things that we need to tick off, kind of like what are the things that we need to make a list of. Maybe it's a session with Christine as we're talking through this. Obviously, we have a new superintendent coming on, so that's another kind of box that is going to be a part of this to think about. I think as we discuss these various things, it might just make sense to have like, this is our list. Maybe we do, I don't want to add any meetings, but I'm just saying, between now and that vote, potentially maybe we swap a committee meeting to have another finance committee meeting. I don't know, Joe, what your thoughts are, but.
I was thinking of taking a Tuesday, the 17th, the 24th, or the 31st, and doing an in-person meeting to try to just get through this in person.
I'm happy. Look, I got this during working hours, so I did a brute force percentage estimate, and, you know, some of them are glaring, and that's the ones I'm reporting now. I mean, I'm seeing one at the very bottom, our miscellaneous budget went up by 45%. I want to know why. I mean, that's just me. I mean, but it went up 45%. Right? We can't have, we're a school district spending taxpayer money. We shouldn't have any miscellaneous expenses. We should be.
Are you referring to the 900s?
The 59 numbers.
So that's the $1.2 million budgetary reserve.
1.25?
Yes. In the 5900s? Yes.
Okay.
So last year, the board did approve a $1.2 million budgetary reserve, and we left it there. And that is certainly an area.
Right. Again, you know, I'm seeing big decreases in paper products and huge increases in everything else as a first whack. And we can't keep doing this because pretty soon we're not going to use any paper. And then, I mean, you can't keep cutting office supplies to pay budget counts. So you know, it's my opinion. I'm only one vote, you know, but it is, you know, some of these numbers, if they're actually true and right, then somebody's got to make them make sense of them. I mean, that's all. Sure. So.
What's the difference in the paper expenditure?
Some of those are like 50%. You know, but it's just as supplies. So I don't know what the supplies are. So.
Is that driven by?
That's head count. And the principals have the autonomy to put supplies, they need an allocation.
So,
and Chromebooks are categorized as.
They're separate. There's a whole lot of supply issues.
Okay, yeah.
So,
Mr. Tate.
So the decrease in supplies, was that mandated?
No,
or?
No, it could just be a reclass.
Okay.
And then my last one, and I'll shut up, is
No,
it does not appear that we're distributing money to the schools in a uniform and consistent way. I sent you that email, and I'm seeing the same thing here.
Well, so to that point, you have, each building principal is given their allocation. And it's $145 for the elementary, $175 for the middle school, and it's I think $182 per student.
Mm-hmm.
So those numbers, if you, and I can circulate the Excel spreadsheet, the aggregate of each building is almost to the penny. It's almost to it. And the building principals have historically had their ability to control their budgets and move money and allocate it so long as they're under that number. So whatever that number is, if it's $24,000 in a particular building, then it's almost to the penny.
So if the aggregates add up, that's okay, per student,
Do that.
per building.
They do.
Yes,
They do.
yeah, he wants,
They
like
do.
to see that.
And the other piece about the temporary salaries, it may entirely be, and this is an internal accounting piece, the 110s, the 120s, 121, 122s, those are professional salaries. We may have had staff members who've come in on a temporary salary basis and had been hired as part of the bargaining unit, and the accounting change hasn't caught up. So I wouldn't be privy to that, who was here last year versus who was here, in the future. So, I mean, that's one way to explain it. I'm happy to talk with Christine and.
These are big numbers.
Sure.
I need to.
Sure.
So.
And it could be just a reclass, and I can dive into that certainly much deeper.
I mean,
Yeah, I think
that
that-
close the budget too.
Yeah,
If that's wrong.
And I think that's the key thing. One is, or does this reflect an increased head count?
It does not.
And
So straight that. It does based on the staffing requests and the attrition, the attritional loss of the $1.1 million, and then the addition of the 7.8 in, and then 3 special ed. I had to go back to this.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a +6.
And if there's a number of individuals who are still on leave, who may be coming back, maybe that's a temporary, literally a temporary budget. So I'm glad you asked. That's a good question.
Well, maybe you can also just compare the temporary number from last year like just for comparison.
Right.
So not this school year, but last school year. Like just this, like.
To see what's
That's what I'm
happening.
doing.
Like,
That's another concern.
but even, like, I guess I'm
Go
saying
back
take
another
another
year.
year, take another year, just to see, like,
Just
just,
to
like,
look-
is there
get
something
a
weird
trend.
with the way it's just counting, or,
give that to you.
I don't know.
5.5 million is 50 staff members.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a couple of heads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, so.
No, agreed. I mean, I'm looking at it too.
Well, to back out for a little bit, a month ago, we were looking at a tax increase of -1%, which put us at 2.4, but kept us on pace where it would be rising with the Act One, correct? And we were, I don't know, what, we were like 5 million apart? And so then we were able to adjust things and did your magic to some degree, right? And then at the board meeting, we were looking at a 2.4% clean, not -1%. And there was it like a 250,000 deficit?
Correct.
So now we're looking at a 2% clean and a $360,000 deficit, but that doesn't take into account some of the revenue that we've heard, that we've learned of today. And it doesn't take into account potential cuts from expenses, correct?
Correct.
So there's solid hope where we could close it at 2% or even lower. Now, whether we should is a different conversation, right?
Sure.
I guess I'm confused. I thought this is at 2.4%.
This,
Slide
No, this
forward.
was a two.
The two.
as of May
There's a
10th,
preview.
as of the time of the hitting save on this slide, it's at 2.0.
Go to the
No,
previous
slide.
slide. Go to the previous slide. It's a
Previous slide it was
2.4.
2.4 with
Correct.
60,
And that's
where we were.
70.
And that's what the board
68,000.
approved before the final budget.
And that explains, I was looking for where that $240,000 went. I see it.
Right.
Is there any hope at
back
actually
to
trimming
two.
away at the budget?
I'm sorry?
Is there any hope at trimming away at the budget from your end, from your perspective?
We'll
Since
go
you
back,
didn't
we'll
hear
go back
back.
to the salaries. I'll rerun the projections.
I think,
I'm
well, not
happy
just
to-
from running projections, but actually looking at the
Well,
operations.
Because we have 1,300 employees, and 800 of them are in the bargaining unit. There are some that are part of the bargaining unit temporarily, that live in the projection, there's some that don't. And there are some who are not collecting a salary this year because they're on leave. They've been on leave for a year. And so we need to make sure we have money to bring them back.
Mhm.
And we also need to make sure that we have 6 individuals who are on federal soft money, that when that money runs out, those substitutes, that's 6 heads right there in professional salaries, that we are paying a full year's salary for that individual until we want to do once the extra money runs out. So there are other considerations there, that you have professional staff who may be on a temporary contract that we have to account for.
Okay.
Do you know what that number is?
I'm sorry?
How many staff are out on
I can get that.
on leave?
I'll get that to you.
So that sort of gets to my question. Let me express it a different way, which is, essentially, might positions be double counted in terms of head count, in the sense that you have this individual who was in a position on leave, this individual who's a temporary employee filling that position. So now you have 2 individuals on the budget for 1 position.
That is correct.
Right.
On a temporary
That's
basis.
entirely possible. And then, so we have budgetary flexibility under state code to reallocate those positions. So if a 4th grade teacher in elementary school comes back from leave and we say farewell to the sunsetting teacher, but we have a teacher at the high school who goes out on leave, well, we stop the budget for that salary. So
Right.
whether it's in the 1100s on the secondary side or the 1100s on the elementary side, the budget doesn't care where it lives, it's where it shakes out in the end, that's what Mike's seeing on the ag.
Yeah, I expected next year, the temporary employee numbers to go down,
Way back to the original.
not go up by a factor. of
Way
50.
back to
That's
pre-COVID,
what
right,
I
right, right.
mean, I expected them to go way down,
Yeah.
you know, so not go up. So it's just flat. So.
Sure.
Does this factor in that number, does that have anything to do with the subs,
You mean?
the substitutes?
That's the fee,
We ain't got
that we
it.
increased the fee.
No, that's a different cost area.
So that increase that he's talking about has absolutely nothing to do with our sub rate, any of
No,
that?
sir.
It has to do
That's a
with
good
people going on
distinction.
leave and covering the people that.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm just trying to, like you said, where is this?
Subs are day to day.
So you see
not on
in your
full-time.
300s, you see a $582,000 increase. There's computer repairs in there, there's four cases up the increase. There's pieces that have been requested and discussed that we've let live in the budget, absent any additional direction.
So I wanted to ask, because I know we have the request for negotiations going on.
We do?
And you don't have to say anything that, doesn't need to be public, but that also has to be in the budget. So I don't
It
know,
does.
we must have some flexibility there.
There is a projected number in that budget. So
That could change up or down.
it certainly could.
Fine.
And, I mean,
We really can't talk about that part.
Yeah.
right.
And so
But
for
it's there and we have to.
it's there. For the community's edification, I'm charged with not overspending the budget, right? So I have to contemplate an additional surplus somewhere, right? So there are things that the oopses, the unknowns, a student comes and requires, $150,000 a year in special services, that if we don't contemplate in the budget, comes out of fund balance. Or we are a little conservative or a little aggressive in our estimates for costs. But what this board is giving direction on is make sure that everything stays as flat as it can be, that you've got transportation as part of that, you've got your custodial costs as part of that, you've got your inflationary costs with your utilities and such, and they're in your 300s and 400s, and you see those are really the largest increases. But then where do you take from without pulling staff members out of the classroom? Well, then it comes from your supplies and your other objects. So we've reclassed some of our expenses because we are funding our debt service differently than we have in years past. So it's going to look like an anomaly. But Matt, kudos to Matt and his team. They came in with a smaller projection on how we can better serve our students with technology. These are pieces of the budget. And coming out of a pandemic where it was anybody's guess how many teachers were going to come back, or how many students, for that matter, were going to come back to a Council Rock school. This is, based on the information I have sitting in our system, this is the best information I can
So
give.
great, because of the number of students. So when we're visiting schools, we found out that there is more and more students coming in from Ukraine or other countries, and there is an increased need to support them. And they said they don't have no idea of projections. They have no idea. I think we have 50 coming in since December.
It's either 40 or 50.
Yeah, and then they said they don't know how many more. And so that's another unknown. We have to think about people.
Well, and ironically, our taxpayers have to pay them.
Yeah.
They didn't come with a check from the state or the federal government. Our taxpayers pay them. The last one for me is, and I think the board gave very firm direction when we did it. We increased the sub rate to arms race levels. Is that back down in here, or did you leave them at arms race levels?
So no, what I did is I'll show you exactly. And you have this detail. In the 1100s and the 1200s, you have professional fees and services. I brought them back to pre-pandemic levels.
Okay. So they went down?
It's slightly higher than it was last year, but not nearly as high as we had anticipated. Because it really is utilization. We may have a 96% fill rate, but of the number of teachers who are absent, we're seeing fewer absences. That's why our fill rate's going up.
Okay, so we're starting next year, we're not paying teachers what we paid them prior.
That provision would sunset.
So what is the daily building based and long-term rate then?
I'd have to get that number exact for you, but
Well, you don't have to get it tonight, Jason, yeah, whatever it is and what it's projected to be will be used.
So when we voted the increase, that was temporary and it goes away at the end of this.
No, we haven't talked about it, that's what I said Thursday.
Yeah, I thought he said we sunset.
You have the option to continue it.
But it is sunsetting if we don't.
Either way we
I
voted on
believe
it,
we
it's
did talk
I'm
about,
finding out.
and I'll have to go back to the record, but I believe we talked about it sunsetting in June.
Okay, so we would go back to where it was
I think
as
we
it stands now.
What's that?
I think that we talked about revisiting it
Yeah.
in June.
Yeah,
and
we
making
have,
a
I'd like to, because I don't know if cutting makes sense versus keeping. Do we know anything? Do we know what our comparable districts are offering?
Sure.
But
The one reason we went with that increase, as we all know, is because we got kids back in school. We needed them in classrooms, not in auditoriums. It was when the first time you got excited, when I got excited. And I don't know if we need to do that. And I would also question, what is our absentee rates? And what have we actually spent on substitutes this year? Because that number is going to be inflated, I would hope, over what a normal school year looks like. And it's going to be a normal school year next year. So, for me, and I said this Thursday, I mean, the sub rate for me has got to be, we have to have that conversation to make sure we're right in this budget. I'm not sold on 7.8 for this team. I'm just not there with that. We've not had that conversation. So, for me, I'm still a no with this. I think you guys are getting close. I'm in the ballpark, as I said Thursday, but I think there's a lot of conversation here. And, what is the return on investment for these things that we're having? Because there's been no, are we still spending $100,000? Is there a $100,000 line item to repair Chromebooks in this budget?
Yes, sir.
Can I make,
I want kids off Chromebooks, I want kids learning.
can I say one thing about your first thing, the sub rate? Regardless of what we do with the sub rate that we're paying out, that's not going to affect your projection for the budget item. So as far as the budget item is concerned, whether we keep the price where it was or not, that's not a
I
function of
brought
his
the
revenue.
costs back to a pre-pandemic level, not the plus up.
It's definitely budgeted.
It's budgeted, but what he said was he put the budget back to
Okay.
what it was, like meaning that regardless of if we keep or we go in the middle, if we increase the rates and keep them increased from what they were, it's not going to affect the line item in the budget. Because you're saying maybe the less absences is what you're anticipating.
And keep in mind.
And let's have that
because-
conversation if you want.
Because of the substitute shortage, we were having classes on cover, so we had an extraordinarily high teacher absentee rate because of whatever issue, right? But we weren't paying for it in the budget because we couldn't get a sub. So then that's where kids were in auditoriums, right? So the solution that we presented to the board was to increase the rate. And we increased the rate, and thankfully it worked. And we anticipate that, I still contend this is one of the best places to come and be a substitute teacher. So we want to maintain that reputation, we want to stay competitive, so I think I have some marching orders to give some comparisons.
I just want to know what that number is. I mean, I want to I want to, go to a raise, so to speak, but I don't want to just give away the raise.
Sure.
I think people that come here, I would argue, probably are here every day they can sub in Council Rock, just like Central Bucks and our sister school districts around the county.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Central Bucks has reduced their rate.
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. I could be wrong. But that's what we're at.
We'll be very sure.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to some of this discussion here, the details that have been asked for, whether, we've increased the sub rate, do we still need that, right? I think that a lot of these figures that have been asked for help to do that, and then that gives us a better understanding of where we're at here. If we have a lot of subs that are falling off and we don't need them because people are coming back, well, great, then we probably don't need to keep that rate high. But to drop it down without an understanding of whether they're coming up may or may not make sense. So yeah, have these numbers would be really helpful to curtail the what ifs to a region where we can wrap our arms around, along with some of the other points.
Could I add on total for the 300s, the comment says forecast sub-payment increase and computer repairs. Of that, we're talking, that's almost $600,000. Not all of that, some of that, maybe 100 or something was 100,000 was for the computer repairs.
I'd have to double check the numbers, but I thought the computer increase was in the $300,000 range.
Okay, so not much of that forecasted pay sub increase was that number. It'd be nice to know what that
We're looking at
was.
almost a $650,000 increase compared to the number that's out on the line this year.
For the sub,
Right.
for the sub increase rating.
So we reduced that, bringing it back to the pre-pandemic level. And knowing that we have to have room in there to fluctuate, because if we do have an increase in absences and we don't have the budgetary reserve to pay for it in the allocation, then we go in the negative.
So we're looking for updated fill rates and then how that detail kind of, you just spoke about in numbers would look as far as pre-pandemic versus the 600,000 where we were last year and where we're going back. Because that's a line item and you're going to make a guess in that budget. The budgets are just guessing,
Budgets are a way of worrying about costs that you haven't incurred yet.
Right. So we're going to make the guesstimates, the best guesstimates we can. I think the next one that somebody mentioned was, Ed, you said the 7.8 versus drop down to the 4. It's a good conversation to have today, because my opinion also was that, we have all these initiatives that were surprised me. It's part of the issue I have overall about doing collective bargaining, which is the biggest portion of our budget, and doing that in the fall when it was scheduled to be done during budget season, so we could actually do all this at the same time. As hard as that is, that actually makes us see a clearer picture. It would have been nice to see these initiatives rolled into the bread when we were baking the collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah,
Yes.
if I may, I gotta say, Joe, revisiting the decision for the early bird, I think, makes no sense. When you look at the result of the early bird negotiation, what we got was a very fair contract for the district and the bargaining unit. And best of all, or one of the real benefits was when that contract was approved, we had 3 years of certainty as to what that cost was going to be. And so the result of the early bird, I think, is nothing but good for the district.
And I'm definitely in a minority if I think otherwise, that's for sure. But what I would say is I wanted to have a clear picture of what now we're facing and do it. Maybe it did benefit us ultimately, but we wouldn't know because we didn't have all the information at the time. If they didn't know that we were coming up with these 5 initiatives come January, that could have at least been mentioned to us at that time. And we still could have done the early bird, but I would like to have had the information. So I feel that I didn't get all that information. And that wasn't even really my point. I think I was going off on a caveat, as I sometimes do. But the point is now we have to focus on those initiatives, and now can we fit them in to a 2.4 or a 2.0? Right, no, 2.4, 2.0, because we're also looking at revenue projections. So there's a lot of things that we have to kind of work out here. And so we got to focus on how much are we willing to increase the taxes and then fit a budget into it. And how much are we going to fight, eat into the fund balance the first year. Remember the projections we had were the Act 1 -1, which was going almost 4% in year 3. It was increasing taxes. So now we're going 2.4. We were at 2.4 with a flat 2 in our projections.
got a flat two.
Now we're flat 2 across the board. So the example you said for, yes, go.
Yeah, I don't think we're at a flat 2. I think we're discussing 2.4 and 2.
No, I mean flat 2 for 5 years in the projections, because we're using the projections as a tool to try to understand how are we going to work out in the next 5 years and look at it in the long term.
When inflation's at 8.3% and mortgage rates are up, it's really hard to look at your taxpayers and say, the state's going to graciously allow us to raise taxes obscenely in those years.
Sure.
It's really hard to do it. We represent these people that are, suffering from, $4.89 per gap. So just because we can, doesn't mean we should. And so
And I'm not advocating.
that's where,
Some people are advocating. I'm not advocating. So the thing is we have to come up with revenue projections that you're comfortable with. We have something here which I'm going to continue to, maybe we should let you continue your slides a little bit, and then we can have a discussion at the end when you come to the
last
2%.
one, I mean, we talked about it, it's a question slide. So
Oh, okay.
what do you want to see?
Well, no, you were at the
Go back
2%.
there.
I think we're going to go back to where does it say the 2%?
Last slide before the question, second last slide.
That's the only
While
place
we're
that has
waiting
the
to
2%.
figure out what slide we're on, I would love to go through this detailed spreadsheet. If you have time, maybe next week, I'm happy to schedule that with you. If someone else wants to join, I've never seen this before, and so I just think it might be helpful if you have some time and wouldn't mind explaining it. I think that would be helpful to me. I really think we need a conversation with Christine Taylor to help answer some of these questions, because you might be able to get us like figures or answers, but I think we need her in the room to provide the context. And so I don't know if we want to work on scheduling a time that works for her and everyone else to do that.
I would like to say that was last week's opportunity when we were all sitting down there in the boardroom, just so you understand, that we were all there and Christine Taylor was in the room in the boardroom when we're trying to get this going. That's why I'm like, now we need to do a special meeting with Christine Taylor, all the cabinet, and work out unless you're going to go
We just
do
got
small
the
groups again.
information. I haven't even seen the information. I haven't even seen the information that you've been talking about, like you said,
The line items?
Yeah,
Yeah, I saw it come in, but I haven't gotten it.
right. I mean, unfortunately,
So what
I
you're
had to
saying
work
is
too.
we couldn't have talked about it last Thursday.
Correct.
We had the line items before Thursday. Only you had it?
Only I had.
Okay.
So as I said, I haven't seen it, so I really haven't said a whole lot because I haven't seen these things that most of the people are talking about. The one thing that I haven't talked about where I've agreed with Ed, and, I look at that STEAM number, 7.8 employees, and I keep on saying that's $1.2 million,
That's this year.
Right.
I'm over 30 years of the employee.
Right, so, I mean, that's the same, this is just year one, so like you said, we gotta look at it, do we really need 7.8, do we need 4.8, do we need 1? I don't know. But, to Mike's point, we'll know more with the revenue, because the one other thing that you never mentioned, that hopefully we'll have an answer on, is you talked about the state revenue that was coming in, where it could be another $2 million, or it could maybe not be $2 million. But if it is, then that's a big change on the one side. But that being said, you still have to look at the expense side of things. Are we using our money? Are we spending our money wisely? Like you said, I don't know, these programs that have been around for 50 years. Do we still need them? Are they still effective? And that's where it's been said. We need to do this, as soon as this budget's passed, we need to go, I would, like you said, hire this consultant and start going through this line by line and seeing where we can save money, what we don't need, and what we do need, and what it's gonna cost, because there are some things. I mean, if we need 7.8 people for STEAM, and that's what it's determined, hey, I'm all for it, but I don't have enough information to say I'm for it or against it, so I'm leaning against it, because I don't, I think we have the town here to, we need 8 more people to do this. I don't know.
Mr. Tate.
I think this is a good discussion, and it's, worthwhile to have this kind of compensation, I would ask our superintendent if it's possible to implement the fifth special for STEAM with 4 people instead of 8.
No, not the way that your goal was to have it in every building and have grades 1 through 6 have it once a week. If the board wanted to contemplate changing that structure, and instead of it being grades 1 through 6, be some other grades, like minimize the number of grades, obviously that would be less people. Just to clarify, the difference between the 7.8 and the 4.8 isn't in the number of teachers that we need for the STEAM special. It's in the number of teachers we hire by repurposing some other, finding efficiencies in other staffing. So unless, as I just said, the board doesn't want to have the STEAM special for grades 1 through 6. If you only want to have it for certain grade levels, then that changes this. Now, we as an administration haven't looked at what would the numbers be if we only needed it for, say, grades 4, 5, and 6. You know, you might think that's cut in half, but it's probably not exactly just neatly cut in half. So again, that's something that could be contemplated, but that's not anything that has been discussed to this point.
We could call it a pilot, in a sense.
Or we could do what we said we were going to do last week and let the new superintendent review.
Well, we voted yes for that, so unanimously, so we already did.
You know,
We already voted
that's
for it.
part of the problem right here is we voted for the new superintendent to put.
But here's the thing, do you put it in the budget or not? Because we're not talking about programs, we're talking about a budget and what we're putting in that budget.
And the budget is agnostic to where the cost goes, whether it lives in the 100s, the 200s, or the 900s. It doesn't matter to me where you put it, but if you're contemplating a cost and it's going to be realized in the next budget year, it needs to live somewhere in the general.
And that's it, go ahead, Mike. Mr. Rosero.
Could I just reframe a couple of things? I just want to focus on this one slide up here, and I want to see if I'm understanding and reading it the way I think I am. Is this proposing a 2% tax increase for the next year and an additional 2% going out for your 5 years? So we're 2.0, 2.0, 2.0, et cetera.
It's a different slide.
It's a different set of slides.
Okay.
But in the Munis, this is for Munis.
Yep.
So this goes to the state PD 2028. You only budget 1 year at a time.
Right.
So it forecasts a 2.0 in future years to keep the fund balance where it is.
Right. But what we're tasked with doing right now is arriving at a tax increase and getting that negative 359, 118 to go to 0. Correct?
Either through additional real estate tax.
Right.
Right,
Or cuts or combination.
Or from fund balance.
Right. So if we get that 359, 118 to go to 0, and we're looking at 2% increase right there, then the question that we have from here about additional revenue and expenses is, A, does that get 359 to go to 0? B, does it enable it to go into the black, where maybe we're looking at 1.9? I don't know. Maybe we're staying at 2.0. I think the website, Council Rock website under financials has audited reports for the past, 5 or 6 years that show a deficit, show a negative number. So to be able to get that to be black would be wonderful. So, then we can get into how close to 0 can we get, right? And that's when I think the discussion of STEAM at 8 or 4 or 3 or 12 or whatever imaginary number comes up becomes to be more relevant as far as how close can we get to 0. But what we're asked to do right now is come up with a budget that we can approve, that we can send to the state, that says this is our tax increase and this is what we're going to be spending money on the next year, correct? All right. And so right now the difference is 359, 118.
Correct.
And that doesn't include potential cuts, and it doesn't include potential revenue increases.
Or decreases.
Or decreases.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr.
So this is a question for Dr. Eden and Dr. Sample. I know we voted for the special, and part of the discussion was we can use some teachers that are already in the district to do the teaching, so we will not have to hire new people, or we can hire new people at a much lower.
We would have to back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So have you looked into that? Do you know if that's possible? Did you have the chance of I don't know if it was enough time to look into that.
To clarify, this budget does contemplate that exact action. So moving existing staff into this role as contemplating, and then backfilling with new teachers.
So the 7.8, the number in the budget is assuming that we use teachers that we now have, and we just hire.
Correct.
Okay. So the new superintendent will not change that.
Superintendent can do with the
In the
support
sense
of the board,
that
can do whatever they want.
they will not change this number dramatically if we want to pursue the problem.
Well, so from an optimist standpoint, if the board chose to vote up on the 16th, the budget as presented, right? And then find whatever savings we could find without changing any of the revenue measures, right? Find the nickels, if you will, right? Then I believe that gives the new superintendent the flexibility. And I wouldn't want to offer a limitation at this point, especially because we are at a critical spot. And if that does, if we decide not to go with 7.8 versus 4.8, we do 4.8 or not at all, then you have that, which will eventually fall to fund balance in the future year, which could be repurposed or contemplated in the future year because it's not going to live in the budget in a future year. So it's easier to pull it out of the budget than to put it into the budget in a future year. That's,
So you're saying it's safer to leave it in, and then we can adjust.
if you're asking my opinion, ma'am, that is my opinion.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question of the board, because to try to push things along and get some clarification why we're all together. When we first surveyed people's tolerance for risk for tax increases, we had some people in the 1s to the 2s, some people want to start at 0, and we had people that were okay with the full Act 1 index. So I guess we're sitting here 2 months, 3 months later with a 2% proposal. Do we have 5 people in this room that are comfortable with a 2% tax increase? And if it's yes or no, easy, or no, I can't answer it unless this question is answered, I'd like to leave the room today with clear indications from everybody if they're comfortable with what's being presented at this point. It was a 2.4, now we're up 2. I would probably go last with my comments, but go ahead.
Yeah. I think you're misstating it. We are not at 2.0. We have spreadsheets for 2.4 and 2.0. If you want to make a decision on that tonight, or you want to get further guidance, that's your prerogative as chair, but what
I could say, no, I'm not at 2.0, I think I'm at 2.4, or I'm at a whatever. What I'm saying is they're providing a 2.4 presentation. This is the current proposal, is 2.0. So I'm talking about what's on the table right now. So if you're comfortable with that, or no, you say, you know what, maybe I want to increase it, or decrease it, then you can tell me. But that's to kind of give Jason and the cabinet some.
Right. I was just clarifying what you said, because I thought you misstated it.
I appreciate that.
All right.
So that's what I'm trying to do, is get an idea of, we're almost back to square. I'm just trying to take the tax increase tolerance question off the table, and if maybe that should be done one-on-one, then that's fine too.
No, I think doing it right now is fine.
Okay.
And I believe that in the best interest of the districts to do what we are trying to do, we need to continue looking at 2.4%, because we still have a delta of close to $70,000. We can whittle away at that, and I'm sure we can find a way to eliminate 70,000. If we went to 2.0, look, we're looking at 360,000.
180.
I think that's not a reasonable objective. So my position is, let's continue working with 2.4 and see how far we can get. And if we can find cuts that reach $400,000, then there we are. There we are at 2.0. But I don't think we're there yet.
Well,
Because
also,
we haven't identified any
when you
cuts.
compare those two slides, there's also revenue increases that touch the gap, because it's a 2.4 to a 2.0 is $600,000, because for every point is $150,000. So there's a $600,000 revenue gap just on tax increases. The other difference of that 300,000 is coming from,
Transfer tax.
okay, from estimated taxes, okay. Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
I'll go next.
Thank you.
So for me, it's never been about percentages or tax increases. It's been about how do we look our constituents in the face and tell them we are offering the best education possible in Council Rock School District. With that being said, we need a STEAM program. We absolutely extend the STEAM program. We're 10 years late in that. But for 3 years, I've talked about we need to clean up the house. We need to find efficiencies throughout the district. To date, we have not done much. We can raise the taxes 4% and everybody be happy because these numbers would work. That does not mean we're better on the back end. And that for me is always going to be a sticking point. And I would task the new superintendent with that process of finding the efficiencies. I don't know what that number is, and that doesn't mean staff cuts. That means efficiencies in what we're doing. Do we need to do this? Is people doing the same job twice? Are we paying people a job that is a part-time job versus a full-time job? Are we overpaying for services that we're not? Have we looked at the IU for different services that we're currently paying in-house? There's a whole litany of ideas that can be done. And for me, this is the third budget I've voted on, and I've yet to see that on the back end. So I'm a no until I start seeing something that, for me, I can go back to the community and say, yeah, we're raising your taxes here, you're getting this, we're doing this for the kids, but we've also cleaned up and found some efficiencies. Because today's budget is 30 years down the road for me. So I'm a no.
Thank you. So you'll be a no.
I'm a
for this
no.
whole-
No, Jason and I are going to talk. And I think Mike, as leadership, we got to sit down and do these conversations. But I'm a no because I don't see enough on the back end. The front end is what it is. That's where it is. I think we're very risky in the IT numbers. I'm concerned about that. I've said this before. We're in the middle of what we're in the middle of. My biggest fear is families lose a job, and those kids that are going to St. Pete or St. Andrews end up in our enrollment numbers. We have schools that you've seen that have enrollment issues right now.
Right.
Where are they going to go? The kids we're getting from Ukraine, they're coming. They need an educator. They need someone to teach them English. That's a cost. That's not factored in up there. And we don't know what that number's going to be. I think we're too close. Our revenues and our expenses are way too close. It's destined to fail. And who's going to fail? It's going to fail in our reserves, and that's a concern for me.
Okay, good. So I appreciate that. So a no today, a no June 17th?
No, I think Jason and I are going to have to figure this. We're going to have to sit down and we're going to.
It's going to be the new superintendent, and again,
I
that's
don't know
not
when
going
the
to
new
happen.
superintendent's
What
going to
I'm
go.
saying is that's not going to be
It's on us
done by
right now.
June 16th.
But I think, as I said last week, I plan on working every June night to get this budget through by the end of the month. And I'll leave it at that.
So we're just, okay.
No, I'm
So you
one-
anticipate not being
I
able to
anticipate
there?
that this group needs to work harder to find efficiencies that we can all get our hands around and we can present that to the community. That's
Right, but the superintendent, let's say whenever they get here, is going to have
The
two.
superintendent shows up in September, it does no good for us right now.
Well, the point I was asking is there any tax increase tolerance? I think you had one
No,
before.
I have no top, no, I'm a zero.
You're 0%.
I'm a zero until I see something on the back end.
Okay.
I mean, Joe, that's like asking me, I want to be 6'5". I do, I really do. It's not gonna happen.
Right.
We're
I'm a
picking
no-
numbers.
I'm a no vote
We're
for
ordering
another
stuff
reason.
off the menu. You want 2.2, you want 2.4? I want efficiencies.
So
That's
we gotta
all.
find 5 votes.
Fine.
I'm no, you're no.
You're a no.
Yes.
I was the guy that wanted a zero because I think you need to justify everything off a zero.
So there's 3 no's for the votes. Regardless of what they present to you guys, you're no's.
Joe, I'm gonna follow off on what Ed said.
That's 3 of them.
Find me some
Efficiencies.
efficiencies, cuts, whatever you wanna call it. Right now, that budget cranked up revenues and did nothing to expenses.
I'm glad we're having this
And there it is. I mean, I wanna see what happens on the expense side.
Honestly, I agree with you. Anybody else want to go?
Do we have time to figure out what's on the expense side, is my question.
And that's a great question.
No.
So, you know, and I don't want to go, because it'll just sound hollow. I'm a yes, but I'm going to be a no next year because we're not going to do this. You know, I'm not going to do this again. You know, we need to find the efficiencies. And like I said, it's May, this is way too late. I mean, you know, this should have started before Mike, Yoda, and I were even sitting here. You know, and I don't want to go and say, yeah, I'm okay now, but I'm not going to let this happen next year, and we do nothing again. So I've always said, you know, it was a 2 at best. So
That's what I thought. You're at a 2 range.
at best,
Honest.
at best.
1 to 2,
So
or maybe 0 to 2.
I just don't know. I don't know if we
You
can
can't do a
find.
zero, Joe. Let me just for the record, you can never do a zero. Ever. It compounds out too quick.
Understood.
I am. I'm undecided because I don't know if I can go there. I'm hoping within the next between now and June 16th. Like I said before, I'm with him. If I got to come here every night from June 1st to June 16th to find something, I'll be here every single night.
So why are we waiting till June 16th to start rolling up our sleeves and doing it?
I don't think people are talking about waiting until June 16th. I think Bob was trying to say he would come in
Every night.
before that. Like, I think
I
he
will
was
come in
just-
I'll start coming in tomorrow night until June 16th if I have
Coming
to.
in where?
Wherever we got to be. If we got to be here, we got to be Zoom to figure this out.
And the end requirement, what are we looking at? What are you looking for? When do we get to the
We
physical?
keep on,
What's the number that we need to get?
no, it's not necessarily even in number.
Well, then
It's
how do we know when
the
we got
effort
there?
of looking at where we can cut our revenues or look at our revenues to see whether or not we're spending money wisely.
Okay, that's fair, and I tell you, you guys have been asking this for at least 3 months since the very beginning of this process. We have been asking for efficiencies and asking for things to be talked about. I think there's a confidential, some things that are probably confidential that shouldn't be talked about public, so maybe an executive session is something we could get counseled on whether or not we should go that route. But I'm glad we're just finally having this conversation, because I'm hearing it one-on-one, but we're not ever getting it to the people who can actually make the end product happen. So I appreciate what you're saying. Right now, you're undecided as far as, you got a 2% was your max. And again, we haven't seen anything less than 2%. Jason, when you had these small groups with individuals, you met with small groups of the board, and you thought you had a 2.4%, that's where we ended up being shown after the small groups had happened with the discussions. So it's a tough year for the budget. Go ahead, Kristen.
I just want to jump in because I know you talked about the small group meetings. I went to one group meeting and it was more of like information being conveyed. We didn't, there wasn't enough time to really talk through it. And so if people want to do that, or if they want, for me personally, my process for this is I want to go through the detail sheet with Jason, whether that's with other board members or by myself. And then based on those questions, I will know, is it something where we need Christine Taylor plus someone, to figure out who do we need in the room to answer the questions, because Jason can't answer them by himself clearly. And I don't think that we're expecting you to be able to talk to all of those things. So if we need several cabinet members, whatever it is, to just get the answers to what we need to.
But the thing is having
So it's
everybody in
not-
a, but if you do it and then they do it, they do it.
No,
we
I
have 4 weeks.
encourage everyone to, I'm just saying what I'm doing personally, but if people have other questions, that's on them to ask them in time or not.
This is why I'm
But-
asking for a group,
Am I-
another meeting in public. Otherwise, it's going to
I
be
think
triple
we're
work.
better
Can
off.
I finish?
I apologize.
Okay. I'm good? Everyone? Okay. So I need this process to play out so I can feel comfortable. It's not about a number, much to what other folks were talking about. If we feel good about this, most of the time when we make these decisions, the test is like, can you go to bed at night and feel okay? Or can you look in the mirror at yourself and you feel okay? So it's, for me, it's not the number, it's making sure that we have a good process, that we can stand behind it, and we can talk to the community about what that is. And that the numbers are solid and that we feel good. And I appreciate the work done by Mr. Harris, so I'm not trying to make this more complicated. I think it just feels a little bit harder. Compared maybe to last year, this process for me feels a little bit harder. But I'm committed to it. I'm not saying the whole entire board has to go through the same process as me, because if I want to spend more time going into detail, that's on me. It's not on you, Joe. It's not on other people on the board. That's on me. And so I'm planning to do my personal due diligence so that by the time we get to a vote, I can feel comfortable voting. But we need to, in my opinion, with the current economic situation being much in flux, I really feel like I owe it to my community and our Council Rock taxpayers to really look at the detail, because I don't remember, previous years thinking about these inflationary numbers. We have a lot, and I've been trying to ask people in the financial industry, kind of what are their forecasts? How far down the road could we be in a recession potentially? Because I think, to some of the dialogue that we had earlier, this could be more for next budget, but how can we set ourselves up for the future? We may not be able to. Who knows? But I think we all owe it to ourselves and our constituents to do as much as we think we need to. And for some people, that may be not going through that Excel sheet, and so everyone has their own process for this. For me, that's my process, that I want to feel good with that. So I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm more than happy to meet in small groups, to meet in large groups, in public, whatever you guys want to do. I'm up for it and ready to go.
Good. You threw out the date of May 17th, that's next Tuesday. We could, all right, we'll find, yeah, election night, but we'll find a date. We could call it a budget workshop. We could request.
24th.
It's going to be public.
It would have to be public. We can't have small group meetings. And this has never been done before in the 6 years that I've been on the board. I think it's a wonderful idea. And we can just ask questions. We can go line by line. We can prepare well in advance so we have our questions and submit them in advance, which is a really good idea.
I would just suggest we submit them ahead.
I think-
Asking this man to answer one of
It
them.
won't be him. A lot of these are going to be answered by Christine.
As I was saying.
So definitely get Chris, sorry, go ahead. He's talking.
I've been trying to speak for the last 5 minutes.
I yield to you.
So I was surprised to hear that for the last 3 years that Ed said he's been on this board, he always wanted to know if there are efficiencies, right? And nothing had happened all this time. So we are now, it's almost unfair to the 3 new board members, because, now I'm questioning whether the numbers on the expense side make sense if there's no trust that has been looked thoroughly in the past. So I think that's a very good process. It's like due diligence, but I'm not sure we can easily do it. Christine Taylor could answer some of the questions, but to go line item by line item and figure out the efficiencies, you need to, I assume, hire someone to do the job, or someone who's extremely well versed with, like, everything that is happening in the district can tell us if maybe, I don't know, we need to buy less paper. I mean, it's not going to be so simple. So this is a long process. I don't know how quickly we can do it. I don't know if we can do it, even if we have the best intentions. I don't know if we are able to go item by item, figure it out. So, but I think it's a great idea. I agree, because it's not really the 2.4% or 3% or 1%. Is what is required to provide the best education for Council Rock. Why we are very deep from the fiscal perspective. You know, we have to be very careful. I mean, we're spending other people's money. So, but at the same time, we have the education to provide. So, I don't know if I can answer the question before we really go through the process. And I don't know what we need to go through this process.
I just wanted to add that there was, I think it was like the year where we were in the shutdown, like that budget year, where Bill Stone gave us, there was like a spreadsheet that had a lot of different options in case we wanted to cut back significantly. And so I think everyone within the different council departments like made suggestions as to like how we could cut back. We didn't necessarily do all of them, but that was an exercise that was done because of the situation that and the uncertainty that we were facing. And so it has, just to make the point that like it has been done in terms of like looking for ways to cut back and looking for efficiencies and things like that. That was in the past. So not to say that in the last 3 years that hasn't happened, because I think that was in like that 2020 year when we were doing the budget for the next year.
But when you go through this process, you may find out that you are very efficient, so there's no room to cut back. Or you may find out that there is room to cut back, but you have to go through the process in order to find out, right?
Yeah, and I mentioned this, and actually Jason and I are going to connect later about bringing an outside consultant in who doesn't really have a buy-in to the district, has fresh eyes, doesn't know any of the, people, not afraid to say, you don't need this, or, do you run a language program that's only got X amount of people in it? Is that the best return on that investment? Or should we look at putting money over here to do this program? This is the trend, should we spend it here? Because the one thing that, it goes back to the struggle of getting STEAM 10 years after some districts have already had it. I want to be at the forefront of education, not reactive to it. So we always should be striving to do better, and sometimes that comes at a cost. And I'm okay with that. I have kids in the school district. But we also have to be able to say, we're doing this because we did this, and we're constantly looking at things. And I think, to be frank, I think public education always does what they've always done. And that, to me, I don't want to be that person. I want to constantly be evolving, and that's something that, maybe it's me, I don't know, but I think.
And to your point, STEAM was a priority for this board. So we brought STEAM in. I'll take it one step further. That became a priority. Something should have fallen off. Everything can't be a priority. So we needed 8 teachers for this. Is there a program that has been in the district for 30 years that maybe doesn't need to be here anymore? That's the level, we don't need a computer class for elementary ed because we gave them all a Chromebook. So if we're having a computer class, should we have that? And every kid's got one of these in their pocket, if we're still doing that, why? Those are the things, to Ed's point, I got involved with the board based on a 2013 gifted education review. We voted last week on that. 9 years later. So, it's.
I'm glad you mentioned the outside consultant, because since Jason even came on board, I was recommending that we have an outside consultant in the finance department because we were short.
No, that's not what he's talking about.
No. Not to work on the budget and efficiency.
No, look, I'm talking about, I don't want to mention their name, Jason's had contact with them, but the group that would come in and look at the entire district. And the phrase they keep using, we've heard this before as a board, return on investment. You spend X amount of dollars, are you getting the biggest bang for your buck? And they come in and lay everything out, basically, this is what I've been told, and they just go through things.
It's part of the budget, it's part of the finance.
Well, it's part of everything.
No, it is part of the finance. It's operational and it's all, bang for the buck means money. It's part of the finance department.
But if you were to say you wanted to hire someone to do our budget, then I just found a cut for it, the entire business.
To find the efficiencies, that's not what I was
Okay,
saying.
that's
To find the
different.
efficiencies.
That's different.
Just what he was saying, I've been saying, you need outside, and I think someone else said it, go ahead.
I think it's a
Sometimes
great
it's
idea
happening.
to recommend to the new superintendent that we should hire a consultant. I think that's a great idea. I think I made a suggestion that we schedule a budget workshop.
It's kind of like the forum, remember?
Yeah, I'm looking at,
We did the forum and we opened up to the public and there were a few people there, but I think this would benefit the board.
Oh, that's the whole purpose.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, I'm shooting from the hip, but I'm looking at the 24th, because the Tuesday sounds like a good day of the week to do it.
I have to look and see if I'm
Okay.
traveling.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We can do.
Because we're talking about meeting every day in June, I'd rather meet every day in
We'll do a
May.
doodle. We'll do a doodle.
I cannot.
Except the 19th.
Okay, we'll do a doodle.
We'll do a doodle. I volunteer to do the doodle.
Okay.
Your deal?
I'll doodle. It'll doodle.
Yes, Mr. Roosevelt.
A couple of quick questions. We asked a bunch of questions in this session. I imagine they're captured. A lot of them were directed toward Ms. Christine Taylor. Is it possible for her to start getting the answers to those questions outside of our meeting?
Absolutely.
We also asked a bunch of questions that were financial toward Mr. Harris. Are some of these questions that have been captured in a minute able to come out?
He's got a residential right now.
You wanted to see, the question was the temporary salaries and the 122s, and I just ran the name projection, and the names don't have the account numbers. So there may be, where it lives in the 120s, whether it's 121 or 122, that may be just an internal change. Historical 18, 19, 19, 20 of those salaries. How many staff are on leave? What is our building base sub rate? What is our actual sub cost with the SS? What is Central Bucks' sub rate? And we asked for the revenue piece. That was a cliffhanger for me. So I'll be completely honest here. I came with a more conservative projection. The board asked with a less conservative projection. Now you're asking me to go back. How far back?
No, that's right.
No, I
Yeah,
think we
that's
need to
not
know
what we're
what that band is and where you're comfortable. I don't want to pick it for you. I want you to tell me where you're comfortable.
Sure.
Right.
Because the entire budget pivots on that. So I think you came in with a very conservative one. The board didn't. Only one board member asked you, could you be more aggressive?
Sure.
It wasn't the board. It was one person on the board, which is fine.
We didn't tally it, yeah.
But I think what I heard tonight was there's a range, and we need to know where's the right place. I don't think in light of the current economic conditions, we can put rose-colored glasses on. And again, that's one word.
Sure.
But the flip side is we may have been too conservative in the past. That's another word. So I need you to tell me where the level of comfort is, and if that means call it Keystone, and in light of the last 6 weeks, whatever.
Sure.
Do that. I mean, that's fine.
And has your projections changed in light of?
Can I finish?
Sorry.
Go for it.
Thank you. So I just wanted to recapture what the questions that we've asked in this session, and if those answers could be provided to us before the workshop, because I think that would maximize the workshop. I agree that if we have that additional information, we can sit here till 3 o'clock in the morning, we're not getting it.
Right.
So let's see if we, I mean, let's see the progress from this. I like the idea of the workshop. I love the idea of finding efficiency. But at the same point, we have an obligation to pass a budget. And to Bob's point, do we have the time to find all these efficiencies now? Additionally, is this something for the new superintendent to start looking around for some of these things? So how much can we logically cover at this point? We have to find a budget. So ceremonially, I voted yes to the 2.4% that we had up at the last board meeting, because we have a financial and a statutory obligation to meet. And it seemed important to me to get that covered. But I have a really hard time looking at my constituents and saying, yeah, I voted for 2.4%, right? So, yeah, I also agree that we probably can't be zero. We were at 2% last year. So, yeah, we have to figure out a big, also return on investment individual. So are we at a good return on investment when we are one of the highest budgets of the 500 school districts in Pennsylvania? We're probably in top 5, I think, but yet we're not even, Council Rock isn't even in top 50 as far as scores. Is that a good return on investment? The community, the board has been asking for STEAM. Guys figured out a way for us to get it. That's in the budget. That makes sense, especially because I think that's going to help our scores increase. I think that's going to help our learning loss increase. Will it? I don't know, but that's what we're doing here. So that makes sense to justify a tax increase. I like the idea of starting from zero, but I know that we're not going to get to zero. So I recognize what Joe is trying to do here is to try to give the administration direction and trying to corral us out of an amorphous yes, no, and I don't think it benefits anybody to be chasing our tails around in circles, telling you to be more conservative, telling you to be less conservative, go back to being more conservative. That doesn't get us anywhere. So I recognize a lot of this. I would like to see the questions that we've raised tonight be sent to us. And then from there, I also like the idea of the workshop. I think that's great. And I think that we can do that.
So,
Does the administration concur?
So if I may suggest, I think what, I've been taking notes, and I know Mr. Harris has as well. We can look at what those questions are, circle up with cabinet members to get a sense of how long will it take you to get these answers. Some of them are probably very quick answers. Some of them are something that are going to take a little bit more work to process through some numbers. So let us kind of coalesce around what those questions are and give you a sense of here's how much time we need to get this information out to you so that you know then, I know Mr. Tate, you said you were going to set up the doodle poll so that you know kind of here's the timeline of when we can have this. If that seems fair for the board, for us to just think through how much time do we need to get the answers that we were asking.
Without the information, we can't schedule a meeting. Because
Correct.
I don't want to have a meeting if there's no information.
Right.
Sure.
And one last thing, I like the idea of getting the information in advance. On the other hand, I think this information is something we owe to the public.
It'll have to be part of presentation.
Right.
So I think it ought to wait for a public presentation, public discussion. Because there's only some,
Well, and I agree that it should be shared with the public. I think one of the things that helps us as administrators is if we send it to you in advance and there are clarifying questions that you have, it gives us an opportunity before presenting it publicly to get some more clarity around something that maybe this didn't quite answer what I was thinking in my question. So I think we can do both.
and we will schedule it around the availability of the cabinet and the superintendent.
And the timing of the questions can be answered. So I think it's good. So we want to get the numbers that the revenue is a big question. So I think you validating the projections for revenue are really good. And again, I think the taxes is going to be a big question coming next meeting.
Jason, just for clarification purposes, you said just Central Bucks and the sub-rate. Christine does a scan of the whole county.
Right, but I just wrote that question, is there a subrate continuing?
Well, I think it's a fair question to see what everybody saw.
Yeah.
That's kind of the information I'd like to see.
Well, and some of those things may be things we don't have answers to.
That's fair.
Because they may not have decided that yet.
Okay,
But,
And
you know, I was just saying to Mr. Harris there, I believe we have the next, on June 2nd, there is a joint finance and facilities committee meeting. So that's already on the books, considering that we have education committee next Thursday. And just, you know, and the 26th is an open Thursday, but I believe there are some members of cabinet that probably aren't available that evening.
Okay.
So,
So again, any other additional requests should also go to you guys? In that meantime, anything that wasn't brought up today, and we'll get through it. We'll get through this. I'd like to, Mr. Harris has rolled his sleeves up and has been nothing but immersed in this since he's been at the school district, and I just want to say I'm proud of the hard work you're doing. All right? I hope everybody appreciates it.
Is that the agenda?
Anybody else for the benefit of the good?
Public comment?
One
If
comment.
not, public comment, just we
Oh
scared her off.
I don't blame her.
Is that it? Ladies and gentlemen, meeting adjourned. Have a great evening.